The mocking laughter of 200 millionaires echoed through the gilded concert hall as Daniel Cruz, a janitor in his faded olive uniform, walked toward the $2 million Steinway piano. "Our cleaning boy thinks he can play," Victor Langford announced with cruel delight, his champagne glass raised in mockery. But as Daniel's weathered fingers touched those ivory keys, the first note that rang out would shatter every assumption in that room and reveal a story of sacrifice that would bring even the coldest hearts to tears. Stay with me until the end of this incredible journey and comment below which city you're watching from so I can see how far our story has traveled. The September rain drummed against the tall windows of Harrington Concert Hall, creating rivulets that distorted the city lights beyond. Inside, warmth radiated from crystal chandeliers that cast golden pools across marble floors polished to mirror perfection. Daniel Cruz pushed his industrial mop bucket across those same floors, the wheels squeaking softly in the vast emptiness of the concert hall at 5:30 in the morning. At 42, Daniel had developed a routine so precise he could navigate the entire building with his eyes closed. Start with the main lobby, work through the corridors, clean the restrooms, and finally, always finally, the concert hall itself. He saved it for last, not because it was the most difficult, but because it was the only part of his job that still made him feel something other than invisible. The morning light was just beginning to filter through those rain-streaked windows when Daniel entered the hall. 2,000 empty seats faced the stage like silent witnesses. At the center, bathed in a shaft of pale sunlight, sat the Steinway Model D, 9 feet of ebony perfection, its surface reflecting the morning like black water. Daniel approached it slowly, his cleaning supplies forgotten by the door. His hand reached out, not quite touching, hovering just above the fallboard that protected the keys. Beneath that polished wood lay 88 keys that had once been his entire world. "Daddy, why don't you play anymore?" The memory of his daughter's voice from 3 years ago still haunted him. Lila had been 7 then, standing in the doorway of their cramped apartment, watching him pack away the last of his sheet music into a cardboard box. "Sometimes we have to put away the things we love to take care of the people we love more," he had told her, sealing the box with tape that might as well have been sealing a coffin. The sound of a door slamming somewhere in the building startled Daniel back to the present. He grabbed his cleaning supplies and moved away from the piano, but not before allowing himself one last glance. Tonight would be the Autumn Gala, the biggest fundraising event of the year. By tomorrow morning, he'd be back here mopping up spilled champagne and gathering forgotten cufflinks from beneath the seats. The day progressed as it always did. Daniel moved through the building like a ghost, nodding politely when spoken to, which was rare, and keeping his head down. The regular staff had started arriving by 7, the caterers by noon. By 3 o'clock, the hall was buzzing with preparation for the evening's event. "Make sure you get those fingerprints off the doors," Margaret, the events coordinator, called out to him as she rushed past with a clipboard. "The donors will start arriving at 7 sharp." Daniel nodded, though she was already gone. He had learned long ago that acknowledgement wasn't expected or particularly desired. He was furniture that moved a function rather than a person. By 6:30, Daniel had changed into his evening uniform, a slightly newer version of the same olive coveralls reserved for when he needed to be present during events. His job during galas was simple: remain invisible, but available, ready to clean up any spills or mishaps without disturbing the flow of the evening. The donors began arriving in their luxury cars, handing keys to valets who would park them in lots worth more than Daniel would make in 10 lifetimes. Women in designer gowns that cost more than his annual salary glided across the floors he had polished that morning. Men in custom tuxedos discussed stock portfolios and vacation homes with the casual air of those for whom money had long ceased to be a concern. Daniel stationed himself in the shadows near the service entrance, watching the crowd fill the hall. He recognized many of the faces not because they recognized him, but because he had been cleaning up after them for 5 years. There was Richard Blackstone, the pharmaceutical executive who always left his whiskey glasses on the piano. Jennifer Walsh, the senator's wife, who had once stepped on his hand while he was cleaning under a table and hadn't even noticed. And of course, Victor Langford. Langford was the chairman of the concert hall's board, a real estate mogul, who had built his fortune on luxury developments that had displaced thousands of working-class families across the city. He was tall, silver-haired, with the kind of aggressive charisma that made people either worship or despise him. Daniel had plenty of reasons for the latter, not least of which was Langford's habit of making sport of the service staff. "Ladies and gentlemen," Langford's voice boomed across the hall as he took the stage, his wireless microphone catching every note of his practiced enthusiasm. "Welcome to our annual autumn gala." Applause rippled through the crowd. Daniel watched from his corner, noting a spilled wine glass near the third row that would need attention once the speeches were over. "Tonight we celebrate not just the arts," Langford continued, "but the generosity of spirit that keeps this magnificent hall alive. Your contributions ensure that future generations will have access to the transformative power of music." More applause. Daniel's jaw tightened. Future generations of the wealthy, perhaps. Tickets to performances here started at $200. When he was studying at the conservatory, he had saved for 3 months to afford a single seat to hear Mikhail Volkov perform. Now Volkov was dead, and Daniel was mopping the floors Volkov had once graced. The evening progressed with the usual parade of speeches, each donor trying to outdo the last with their pledges. Margaret appeared at Daniel's elbow during the third speech. "There's been an accident in the green room," she whispered urgently. "Someone knocked over an entire tray of wine. Can you—" Daniel was already moving, grabbing his supplies. The green room was where the evening's entertainment was preparing a string quartet from the City Symphony. When Daniel entered, he found 4 musicians in formal attire standing helplessly around a spreading puddle of red wine that was dangerously close to a violin case. "Oh, thank God," the first violinist said. "We didn't want to leave the instruments, but—" "I've got it," Daniel said quietly, already kneeling with his towels. The wine had splattered across the floor in a pattern that reminded him absurdly of a Pollock painting. He worked quickly, efficiently, aware of the musicians watching him. "That's a Guarneri," the violinist said nervously, indicating the violin case. "It's worth more than my house." Daniel carefully moved the case to safety before continuing his work. As he did, he noticed the sheet music spread across a nearby table, Mozart's String Quartet No. 19, the Dissonance Quartet. Despite himself, he found his eyes tracking across the familiar notes of the first violin part. "You read music?" the second violinist asked, noticing his gaze. Daniel looked up, startled. A little. The first violinist laughed. "Most people can't even tell it's music they're looking at. You play—" "Used to," Daniel said, returning his attention to the floor. "Long time ago." "What instrument?" "Piano." There was something in the way he said it, a weight, a history, that made the musicians exchange glances. "You should come hear us sometime," the cellist offered. "I mean, when you're not working. We do free performances on Sunday afternoons sometimes." Daniel smiled, a genuine smile that transformed his usually guarded face. "That's kind." "Thank you." He finished cleaning and left quickly, not wanting to extend the conversation. Kindness from strangers always made him uncomfortable now, like wearing clothes that no longer fit. Back in the main hall, the speeches had concluded and dinner was being served. Daniel returned to his post, watching the elegant choreography of the waitstaff as they delivered course after course to tables dressed in white linen and crystal. It was during the dessert service that it happened. Langford had been holding court at the head table, regaling his captive audience with stories of his latest development project, a revolutionary luxury complex that would transform another working-class neighborhood. He had consumed quite a bit of wine, his voice growing louder and more boastful with each glass. "The truth is," Langford was saying, gesturing expansively with his dessert fork, "most people simply don't appreciate culture. They wouldn't know real art if it walked up and introduced itself." Speaking of which, one of his companions, a hedge fund manager named Preston, interjected with a smirk, "I heard the most amusing thing. Apparently one of the janitors here claims he can play piano. Can you imagine?" The table erupted in laughter. Daniel, standing 30 feet away, felt his blood turn to ice. "Which one?" Langford asked, his eyes scanning the room with predatory interest. "I don't know his name," Preston said. "Hispanic fellow, I think. Someone overheard him talking to the musicians earlier." Langford's gaze found Daniel with laser precision. "You there?" he called out, his voice carrying across the entire hall. "Maintenance, come here." Every head in the room turned. Daniel felt 200 pairs of eyes fix on him as he slowly walked toward the head table, his footsteps echoing in the sudden silence. "Are you the one who claims to play piano?" Langford asked, his tone dripping with amusement. Daniel stood very still, his hands clasped behind his back. "I used to play, sir, many years ago." "Used to?" Langford stood addressing the room now. "Ladies and gentlemen, it seems we have a hidden maestro among us. Our janitor here used to play piano." The laughter that followed was different from before, sharper, meaner. It was the laughter of those who found sport in the misfortune of others. "Tell us," Langford continued, clearly enjoying himself, "where did you study the prestigious Academy of Mop and Bucket?" More laughter. Someone actually applauded. Daniel's hands clenched behind his back, but his face remained neutral. "The New England Conservatory, sir." The laughter stopped abruptly. Langford blinked momentarily, thrown off his rhythm. "You're joking, he said. "No, sir." Langford studied him for a moment. Then his smile returned wider and more vicious than before. "Well then, this is even better than I thought. Ladies and gentlemen, we have a conservatory-trained pianist who chose to become a janitor. There must be quite a story there. Tell me what happened." "Failed your exams. Couldn't cut it in the real world." Daniel said nothing. "Cat got your tongue," Langford pressed. "Or perhaps you're lying. Perhaps you've been telling stories to make yourself seem more interesting than you really are." "I'm not lying, sir." "Prove it." The words hung in the air like a challenge. Langford gestured grandly toward the Steinway on the stage. "There's a piano right there. Play something for us." "Mr. Langford," Margaret appeared seemingly from nowhere, her face flushed with embarrassment and concern. "I don't think—" "Nonsense." Langford waved her away. "This is the most entertainment we've had all evening. Unless, of course, our friend here would prefer to admit he's been telling tales." Daniel looked at the piano, then back at Langford. In that moment, he saw not just the chairman, but every person who had looked through him for the past 5 years. Every dismissive glance, every failure to acknowledge his humanity, every assumption that because he pushed a mop, he was somehow less than them. "What would you like me to play?" Daniel asked quietly. The room erupted in excited murmurs. Phones appeared in hands ready to capture what everyone assumed would be a spectacular humiliation. "Oh, this is too good," Langford laughed. "By all means, dealer's choice. Play whatever you think you can manage. Maybe chopsticks, I believe that's appropriate for beginners." Daniel walked to the stage. Each step felt like a mile, like walking through water, like every nightmare he'd had about returning to a piano after Maria died. The audience was settling in, pulling their chairs around for a better view, their faces alight with the particular excitement that comes from witnessing someone else's impending embarrassment. He sat at the bench, his work boots incongruous against the brass pedals. The lid was already open. It was always kept open during galas, a visual reminder of the hall's purpose. Daniel looked down at the keys, and for a moment he couldn't breathe. The last time he had sat at a piano like this, Maria had been in the audience. It was his final doctoral recital 2 weeks before the accident. She had been 8 months pregnant with Lila, radiant in a blue dress that brought out her eyes. "Play like you're telling our baby a story," she had whispered to him before he went on stage. "Play like you're showing her all the beautiful things waiting for her in this world." 2 weeks later, a drunk driver ran a red light. Maria died on impact. The doctors performed an emergency C-section, and Lila survived a miracle, they said. Daniel had held his premature daughter in the NICU, her entire body fitting in his 2 hands, and made a promise she would never want for anything, never feel unsafe, never doubt that she was loved, even if it meant giving up everything else. The doctorate went unfinished. The concert career that had been waiting for him evaporated. He sold his piano to pay for Maria's funeral and Lila's medical bills. When the money ran out, he took the first job he could find that offered health insurance and stable hours. 5 years later, here he was. Daniel placed his hands on the keys. The muscle memory was still there, would always be there. Some things the body never forgets. He began to play. It wasn't chopsticks. It wasn't even Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat major, though he would play that later. He began with something more unexpected. Rachmaninoff's Prelude in G minor Op. 23. Number 5. It was a piece that demanded not just technical skill but emotional depth, a piece that could only be played by someone who had lived through both triumph and loss. The first notes rang out like a declaration of war. Daniel's left hand established the march-like rhythm, while his right hand sang the melody, proud, defiant, tinged with an underlying sadness that spoke of things that could never be recovered. The laughter in the room died instantly. Phones that had been raised to record a humiliation remained raised, but now they were capturing something else entirely. The transformation was immediate and absolute. The janitor in olive coveralls had vanished, replaced by an artist whose presence filled the entire hall. Daniel's hands moved across the keyboard with the kind of fluid precision that comes only from years of dedicated study. The Rachmaninoff built in intensity, the march becoming a storm, the melody fragmenting and reforming in increasingly complex patterns. He played with his whole body swaying with the rhythm, his face reflecting every emotional shift in the music. In the audience, Victor Langford had slowly sunk back into his chair, his face pale. Around him, mouths hung open. Someone dropped a fork, and the clatter sounded like thunder in the silence between notes. Daniel moved seamlessly from the Rachmaninoff into Liszt's La Campanella, one of the most technically demanding pieces in the piano repertoire. His fingers flew across the keys and passages that most professional pianists struggled with, the bell-like melody singing above the furious accompaniment. It was showing off, he knew, but he couldn't help himself. 5 years of silence, 5 years of being invisible, 5 years of holding all of this inside. It came pouring out through his fingers like water breaking through a dam. A woman in the third row was crying. She didn't know why exactly, only that she was witnessing something profound, not just a performance, but a revelation. Here was beauty in unexpected places, talent in overlooked corners, a reminder that every person carrying a mop or serving a meal or cleaning a bathroom might be carrying within them entire universes of capability and dreams. Daniel transitioned into something softer, Debussy's Clair de Lune. If the Rachmaninoff had been defiance and the Liszt had been technical mastery, the Debussy was pure emotion. He played it for Maria for the nights they had spent walking under moonlight planning their future. He played it for Lila for all the lullabies he had hummed to her when she was too small to understand that her mother was never coming back. The notes floated through the hall like memories made audible. Even the waitstaff had stopped standing frozen with trays in their hands, transfixed. Margaret stood by the service door, tears streaming down her face, her clipboard forgotten on the floor. As the Debussy faded, Daniel paused, his hands hovering over the keys. The silence in the room was complete, not even a cough or a shifted chair. He could stop now, he knew. He had made his point. But there was one more piece he needed to play, one he hadn't played since Maria died. It was Chopin's Ballade No. 1 in G minor, Op. 23. A piece that told a complete story in just under 10 minutes, moving through passages of tender beauty, passionate outbursts, moments of doubt, and ultimately a fierce, almost violent conclusion. It was the piece he had been practicing when Maria told him she was pregnant. It was the piece he was going to play at Carnegie Hall before everything changed. He began quietly, the opening melody unfolding like a question. As the piece developed, Daniel poured everything into it, his love for Maria, his fears for Lila, his rage at the unfairness of life, his grief for the career that might have been, and underneath it all, a stubborn, unbreakable thread of hope. The ballad built toward its climax, the coda approaching like an approaching storm. Daniel's hands thundered across the keyboard in the fearsome passages that had defeated so many pianists. But for him, they were not obstacles to overcome, but emotions to express all the fury and pain of the last 5 years given voice at last. When the final chord crashed through the hall, Daniel lifted his hands from the keys and let them fall to his sides. He was breathing hard, sweat beading on his forehead. For a moment he had forgotten where he was, forgotten the audience, forgotten everything except the music. The silence that followed was different from before, not the silence of anticipation, but of awe. It stretched for 5 seconds, 10-15. Then from somewhere in the back of the room, a single pair of hands began to clap. Others joined slowly, at first, then building into a wave that crashed over the entire hall. People rose to their feet first, one by one, then in groups, until all 200 guests were standing applauding with the kind of intensity usually reserved for world-famous performers. Daniel stood slowly, turned to face the audience, and saw something he had never expected to see in their faces: respect. More than that, recognition. They saw him now, truly saw him, not as a function or a piece of furniture, but as a human being with depths they had never imagined. Victor Langford was still seated, his face a complex mixture of emotions: shock, embarrassment, something that might have been shame, and underneath it all, genuine admiration. He stood slowly as if his legs weren't quite steady and began walking toward the stage. The applause continued as Langford climbed the steps. Daniel watched him approach, unsure what to expect. An apology. A dismissal. More mockery. But Langford did something unexpected. He extended his hand. That was... Langford paused, seemingly at a loss for words for the first time Daniel had ever witnessed. That was extraordinary. You're not just good, you're world-class. Why in God's name are you cleaning our floors? Daniel looked at the extended hand for a moment before shaking it. Life doesn't always go according to plan, Mr. Langford. But with talent like that, talent doesn't pay for health insurance, Daniel said quietly. Talent doesn't guarantee stable hours or a steady paycheck. I have a daughter to raise. Langford released his hand, studying him with new interest. A daughter? She's 10. Her mother died when she was born. The words hung in the air between them. Around them, the applause was finally dying down, replaced by a buzzing of excited conversation. What's your name? Langford asked. Your full name, Daniel Cruz. Daniel Cruz? Langford repeated, as if testing the weight of it. Well, Mr. Cruz, I owe you an apology. Not just for tonight, but for... He gestured vaguely, encompassing 5 years of invisibility. You don't owe me anything, Mr. Langford. On the contrary, I owe you a great deal. We all do. Langford turned to address the room, his voice carrying without the microphone. Ladies and gentlemen, I think we've all learned something tonight about the danger of assumptions. Mr. Cruz here has been maintaining this hall for 5 years, and not one of us, myself included, ever bothered to see the person behind the uniform. He turned back to Daniel. You said you studied at the New England Conservatory. Yes. Doctoral program. I was 2 weeks from defending my dissertation when Daniel stopped. When life intervened. Langford nodded slowly. Mr. Cruz, I'd like to discuss something with you. Not tonight, you've given us more than enough tonight. But tomorrow, perhaps? My office, 10 o'clock. Daniel thought of his shift, which started at 5:30. I have to work. I'll clear it with maintenance, please, Mr. Cruz, 10 o'clock. Daniel nodded slowly, not trusting himself to speak. Langford addressed the room again. I think we should let Mr. Cruz return to his evening, but I hope... He paused, looking directly at Daniel. I hope this isn't the last time we hear him play in this hall. Daniel walked off the stage to another round of applause. As he passed through the crowd, people reached out to touch his arm, to offer words of praise, to introduce themselves as if he were a new discovery rather than someone who had been cleaning up after them for years. The string quartet from the symphony intercepted him near the service door. That was incredible, the first violinist said, her eyes shining. You're the real deal. Why didn't you say something earlier? Would it have mattered? Daniel asked gently. She flushed, understanding his meaning. You're right. It shouldn't have taken this. I'm sorry. Margaret appeared at his elbow. Mascara streaked down her cheeks. Daniel, I had no idea. 5 years and I never... God, I'm so sorry. For what? Daniel asked. You were never unkind. No, but I was never really kind either, was I? Never really saw you. She squeezed his arm. That changes now. Daniel excused himself and slipped out through the service door into the cool September night. He stood in the loading dock, breathing in the rain-scented air, trying to process what had just happened. For 5 years he had been invisible by choice, as much as circumstance, hiding behind his uniform and his silence. Tonight, that had been stripped away. His phone buzzed, a text from Mrs. Chen, the neighbor who watched Lila during his evening shifts. Lila says to tell you she finished her homework. She's watching that piano competition show again. Everything okay? Daniel smiled, texting back. Everything's fine. Tell her I'll be home soon. He went back inside to finish his shift, but the rest of the evening passed in a strange blur. People who had never acknowledged his existence suddenly knew his name. Donors approached him to share their own stories of dreams deferred or abandoned. One elderly woman pressed a check into his hand for your daughter's education, refusing to take it back despite his protests. By the time the gala ended at midnight, Daniel was exhausted in a way that had nothing to do with physical labor. He gathered his supplies, preparing to clean the hall as he always did after events. But when he entered the main room, he found it spotless. The waitstaff, the caterers, even some of the guests had stayed behind to clean up. Least we could do, one of the waiters said, embarrassed, after what you gave us tonight. Daniel didn't know how to respond to kindness on this scale. He simply nodded, gathered his things, and headed for the exit. But as he passed the stage, he stopped. The Steinway sat there, lid still open, waiting. He walked over and gently closed the fallboard over the keys, running his hand along the smooth wood. Thank you, he whispered, though whether he was thanking the piano, the music, or Maria's memory, he wasn't sure. The drive home was quiet, the streets mostly empty at this hour. Daniel lived in a modest two-bedroom apartment in Queens, 45 minutes from the concert hall. It was a far cry from the Boston brownstone he and Maria had dreamed of, but it was safe, clean, and in a good school district. He climbed the 3 flights of stairs quietly, not wanting to wake the neighbors. Mrs. Chen was dozing on the couch, the TV still on but muted. She woke as he entered. You're late, she said, then looked at him more closely. Something happened. Something happened, Tutin, he agreed. She studied his face, then smiled. Good. Something, I think. Maybe. I don't know yet. Lila's asleep. She wanted to wait up, but... Mrs. Chen gathered her things. Daniel, that girl loves you more than life. Whatever happened tonight, remember that. After she left, Daniel checked on Lila. She was curled up in her bed, one arm thrown over her head, the other clutching the stuffed elephant Maria had bought before she was born. In the dim light from the hallway, Daniel could see Maria's features in their daughter's face, the same delicate nose, the same determined chin. He sat on the edge of her bed, careful not to wake her, and smoothed her dark hair back from her forehead. I played tonight, baby, he whispered. I played like I was telling you a story, like I was showing you all the beautiful things waiting for you in this world. Lila stirred but didn't wake. Daniel kissed her forehead and went to his own room. On the dresser was their family photo, the only one with all 3 of them taken when Maria was 7 months pregnant. They were at Tanglewood, the summer music festival. Maria radiant in a sundress. Daniel's hand on her belly. Both of them laughing at something the photographer had said. I don't know what happens now, he told the photo. Langford wants to meet tomorrow. It could be nothing. It could be everything. I'm scared, Maria. I've been safe in my invisibility, but tonight I remembered who I used to be, who you believed I could be. He changed out of his uniform, hanging it carefully in the closet. Tomorrow he would put it on again, would return to being the janitor at Harrington Concert Hall. But something had shifted tonight, some door had opened that couldn't be closed again. As he lay in bed, Daniel thought about the moment his hands had first touched the keys, the way the music had poured out of him like water from a broken dam. For 5 years, he had convinced himself that music was something he used to do, a person he used to be. But tonight had proven that music wasn't what he did. It was who he was. You could take away the concerts, the career, the recognition, but you couldn't take away the music itself. It lived in his bones, in his muscle memory, in the part of his soul that even grief couldn't touch. His phone buzzed again. An unknown number had sent a video. Daniel opened it and saw himself at the piano playing the Chopin ballade. Someone had filmed the entire performance. The comments were already pouring in. Who is this incredible, better than most concert pianists I've paid to see? Daniel turned off his phone. Tomorrow would bring whatever it would bring, but tonight, for the first time in 5 years, he had been himself. Not the ghost who mopped floors and emptied trash cans, but Daniel Cruz, pianist, father, survivor. The rain had stopped and moonlight streamed through his bedroom window. The same moonlight Debussy had tried to capture in sound, the same light that had illuminated his walks with Maria. Daniel closed his eyes and let his fingers move against the bedsheet, playing an imaginary piano, the music continuing in silence long after the world had gone to sleep. In her room, Lila stirred again, and for just a moment her eyes opened. "Daddy?" she called out sleepily. Daniel rose and went to her doorway. "I'm here, baby." "Were you playing? I thought I heard music." "Maybe in your dreams." "It was beautiful," she murmured, already drifting back to sleep. "Like Mommy's lullabies." Daniel stood in her doorway for a long moment, watching her breathe. Tomorrow Langford would make some offer or other. Tomorrow decisions would need to be made about the future, about risk versus security, about dreams versus reality. But tonight had already given him something precious, the knowledge that he hadn't lost himself completely, that the music Maria had loved was still there waiting. "Good night, my love," he whispered to his daughter. "Dream of beautiful things." He returned to his room, but sleep eluded him. His mind raced with possibilities, with fears, with memories of the audience's faces as they truly saw him for the first time. At 3 a.m, he gave up and went to the living room where an old keyboard sat covered in dust in the corner, a cheap thing he'd bought at a yard sale years ago but never played. He uncovered it, plugged it in, and with the volume turned down so low it was barely audible, began to play. Not Chopin or Rachmaninoff or Liszt, but something new, something his fingers discovered as they moved a melody for Lila, for Maria, for himself. A song of loss and hope, of sacrifice and dreams, of the moment when the invisible becomes visible, when the silent find their voice. Outside, the city slept, but in a small apartment in Queens, music was being born quiet, tentative, but absolutely undeniably alive. The morning arrived too quickly, bringing with it a reality that felt both familiar and utterly changed. Daniel's alarm went off at 4:30, as always, but when he reached to silence it, his fingers ached from the previous night's performance, a sweet pain he hadn't felt in years. He lay there for a moment, wondering if it had all been a dream, but the 8 missed calls from unknown numbers on his phone proved otherwise. Lila was still sleeping when he checked on her. He left a note on the kitchen table, as he always did. "Have a great day at school, sweetheart. Cereal's in the cabinet, lunch money's on the counter. Love you to the moon and back. Dad." The subway ride to Manhattan felt different this morning. Daniel caught his reflection in the dark window and saw the same face that had looked back at him for 5 years, tired, weathered, older than his 42 years. But something in his eyes had changed. The resignation that had lived there for so long had been replaced by something else. Not quite hope, he wasn't ready for hope yet, but possibility. He arrived at Harrington Concert Hall at 5:20, 10 minutes early as always. The building stood silent in the pre-dawn darkness, its windows reflecting the streetlights like watching eyes. Daniel used his key to enter through the service entrance, the familiar smell of cleaning solutions and old wood greeting him like an old friend. But when he went to clock in, Margaret was waiting for him in the break room. "Jesus, Margaret," Daniel said, startled. "You're here early." "I couldn't sleep," she admitted, clutching a cup of coffee like a lifeline. Her eyes were red-rimmed, though whether from crying or exhaustion, Daniel couldn't tell. "Daniel, I need to tell you something." He set down his things, wary. "If this is about last night, it is, but not in the way you think." She took a shaky breath. "My son was a pianist." "Is a pianist, I suppose, though he hasn't touched a piano in 3 years. Daniel said nothing, sensing this was something she needed to say. "He was good," Margaret continued, "really good, Juilliard good, but the pressure, the competition, the constant judgment, it broke something in him. He had what they called a performance anxiety incident during his junior recital, completely froze, couldn't play a note. He left school that night and never went back." She looked up at Daniel, tears threatening to spill over. "He's 25 now, works in IT, says he's happy, but I know he's not. Music was everything to him, like breathing. And last night watching you play, after everything you've been through, seeing that the music survived despite the pain." She broke off, wiping her eyes. "I sent him the video someone posted. He called me at 3 a.m. crying. He said if you could find your way back to the piano after losing your wife, maybe he could find his way back too." Daniel reached across the table and took her hand. "Margaret, I've been such a fool," she interrupted. 5 years you've been here, and I never once asked about your life, your story. I pride myself on running these events, on knowing everything about this hall. But I didn't know that one of the most talented pianists I've ever heard was mopping our floors." "You weren't unkind," Daniel said, echoing his words from the night before. "No, I was worse. I was indifferent." She squeezed his hand. "That changes now. And not just because of your talent. Because you're a person and you deserve to be seen all along." She stood composing herself. "Mr. Langford called me this morning. You're not on cleaning duty today. He wants you rested for your meeting. I'm supposed to send you home, but I thought—" She hesitated. "I thought maybe you'd want to play first. The hall's empty. The piano's there. I could unlock it for you." Daniel's heart lurched. "I couldn't. It's a piano that should be played," Margaret said firmly. "And you're a pianist who should be playing. Please, Daniel. I think we both need this." They walked to the concert hall together, their footsteps echoing in the empty corridors. Margaret unlocked the hall and turned on just the stage lights, leaving the audience in darkness. The Steinway weighted its black surface gleaming like still water. "I'll be in my office," Margaret said softly. "Take as long as you need." Alone with the piano, Daniel approached it slowly. In the daylight, without an audience, without the pressure of proving himself, it was just an instrument. Wood and wire and felt, assembled with precision and care. He sat at the bench and opened the fallboard, revealing the keys. This time he didn't play Chopin or Rachmaninoff. He played Bach, the Goldberg Variations music that was both mathematical and deeply human-structured and free. It was music that demanded nothing but attention, that existed simply to exist, like breathing or heartbeat. As he played, Daniel felt something inside him begin to unknot. For 5 years he had carried his grief like a stone in his chest, heavy and immovable. But music, he realized, was like water. It could flow around the stone, could find the cracks and crevices, could slowly, patiently wear it down to something manageable. He was halfway through the variations when he heard footsteps. He looked up to see a man in his 60s standing in the doorway wearing an expensive suit, but looking oddly uncertain. "Please don't stop," the man said. "I'm early for a meeting, but I heard the music and—" He paused. "You're him, aren't you, the janitor from last night? The video's already has 2 million views." Daniel's hand stilled on the keys. 2 million. Someone posted it on social media with the caption, "Janitor stuns elite crowd with world-class performance." It's everywhere. My wife sent it to me this morning. She said it made her cry. The man walked closer, his footsteps careful as if afraid to disturb something sacred. "I'm Richard Blackstone. I was here last night, though I'm ashamed to say I don't remember seeing you before that, despite apparently attending dozens of events you must have worked." Daniel recognized the name, the pharmaceutical executive who always left his whiskey glasses on the piano. "You like Lagavulin," Daniel said quietly. "Neat. You usually have 3 glasses during an event." Blackstone's face reddened. "You notice everything, don't you? While we noticed nothing." He sat down in one of the front row seats. "I have a confession. I can't read music. I can't play any instrument. But I love it live for it, really. It's why I donate to this hall. And last night what you played, I've heard that Chopin Ballade performed by some of the world's most famous pianists, but none of them made me feel what you made me feel." "What did you feel?" Daniel asked, genuinely curious. Blackstone thought for a moment. "Like I was seeing someone's entire life laid bare. The joy, the pain, the loss, the love, all of it, without words, without explanation. Just truth." They sat in silence for a moment, then Blackstone stood. "Mr. Cruz, I don't know what Langford has planned for your meeting, but I want you to know that whatever happens, you have supporters now. People who won't let you disappear again." He pulled out a business card. "My daughter runs a music therapy program for children with disabilities. They're always looking for pianists. The pay isn't much, but—" "It's not about the pay," Daniel said, taking the card. "No," Blackstone agreed. "It never is it? Not for the real artists." After he left, Daniel played for another hour, working through pieces he hadn't touched in years. His fingers remembered everything, every passage, every phrase, every subtle gradation of touch that distinguished good playing from great. When he finally stopped, his hands were trembling, not from exhaustion, but from emotion. He closed the piano and made his way to the lobby, where he found a small crowd had gathered. Apparently word had spread that he was playing, and several staff members had come early to listen. They applauded as he appeared, and Daniel felt his face burn with embarrassment. "Don't stop playing," one of the security guards called out. "We've been listening from out here. It's beautiful." Daniel nodded, overwhelmed, and quickly made his way to the break room. He had 2 hours before his meeting with Langford, and he needed to think. He made himself a cup of coffee, the good stuff that was usually reserved for management, and sat at the scarred wooden table where he'd eaten hundreds of lonely meals. His phone rang. The school, Sir... Mr. Cruz. "This is Principal Morrison. I'm afraid there's been an incident with Lila." Daniel's blood turned to ice. "Is she hurt?" No, nothing like that, but she's very upset. Apparently some of the children saw the video of you playing, and well, children can be cruel. They've been teasing her about her father being a janitor. She's in my office now, and I think you should come." Daniel was out the door before the principal finished speaking. He caught a taxi, an extravagance he couldn't afford, but didn't care about in that moment. During the ride, his phone buzzed constantly with messages and calls, but he ignored them all. Nothing mattered but Lila. He found her in the principal's office, her face streaked with tears, her hands clenched in her lap. When she saw him, she launched herself into his arms. "Daddy, they said horrible things," she sobbed into his shoulder. "They said you were pretending to be something you're not. They said people like us don't belong in places like that. They said..." "Shh, baby," Daniel murmured, holding her tight. "It's okay. I'm here." Principal Morrison, a kind-faced woman in her 50s, looked troubled. "Mr. Cruz, I've spoken to the children involved, and their parents will be contacted. But I wanted you to know that Lila defended you quite fiercely. She may have also punched Timothy Walker in the nose." "Lila," Daniel pulled back to look at his daughter's face. "He said you were just a servant playing dress-up," Lila said defiantly, though her lip trembled. "He said his father could buy and sell people like us." Daniel's jaw tightened. Timothy Walker's father was a hedge fund manager, one of those who'd laughed the loudest last night before the performance. "Violence is never the answer," Daniel said, though part of him wanted to punch Timothy Walker's father himself. "You know that." "I know," Lila whispered. "But Daddy, why didn't you tell me? All this time I thought you gave up music for me. I thought it was my fault." Daniel's heart broke. He knelt down to her level, taking her small hands in his. "Listen to me, Lila. I made choices, yes, but they were my choices made from love, never from obligation. You are not, and have never been anything but the greatest gift in my life. Understand?" She nodded, but doubt still lingered in her eyes. Principal Morrison cleared her throat. "Mr. Cruz, if I may, I watched the video this morning. What you did last night was extraordinary. But I think what's even more extraordinary is what you've done every day for the past 5 years, showing up, working hard, taking care of your daughter. That takes a different kind of talent, one that's much rarer than musical ability." "Can I go home?" Lila asked quietly. Daniel looked at the principal, who nodded. "I think that would be best for today." "Lila, you're not in trouble, but we need to talk about better ways to handle conflict, okay?" As they left the school, Lila clung to Daniel's hand. "Daddy, are you going to be a pianist now?" "Like for real?" "I don't know, baby. I have a meeting with Mr. Langford in..." He checked his watch and swore under his breath. 45 minutes. "I have to go back to the hall. Can I come?" Daniel hesitated. He'd never brought Lila to the concert hall, had kept that part of his life separate, protected. But looking at her tear-stained face, he realized that separation had been a mistake. She deserved to see all of who he was. "Okay," he said, "but you have to promise to be quiet during my meeting." The taxi ride back to the hall was quiet. Lila pressed against his side, her hand in his. Daniel's phone continued to buzz, but he turned it off completely. Whatever the world wanted from him could wait. They arrived at the hall with 10 minutes to spare. Daniel led Lila through the main entrance this time, not the service door. Several people recognized him pointing and whispering, but he kept walking Lila's hand firmly in his. Margaret was waiting in the lobby. Her face lit up when she saw Lila. "You must be the famous daughter," she said warmly. I'm Margaret. Your father has told me absolutely nothing about you, but I'd love to change that. Would you like to see the hall while your dad has his meeting? Lila looked up at Daniel, who nodded. It's okay. Margaret's a friend. The word friend made Margaret's eyes water, but she covered it with a bright smile. Come on then, let me show you where your father played last night, and where hopefully he'll play again. Daniel watched them go, then made his way to Langford's office on the third floor. He'd cleaned it hundreds of times, but had never been invited in while Langford was present. The door was open and Langford was on the phone gesturing for Daniel to enter and sit. The office was exactly what Daniel expected. Massive, ostentatious, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Central Park. Awards and photos covered one wall. Langford with presidents and celebrities, always smiling, always at the center. I don't care what the Times wants, Langford was saying into the phone. No interviews until I say so. Yes, I know how many views the video has. 3 million now, Jesus. He looked at Daniel. I have to go. Keep them at bay. He hung up and leaned back in his chair, studying Daniel with the kind of intense focus that had built him a real estate empire. 3 million views in 12 hours, Langford said. Do you know what that means? That people like to watch rich people get humiliated, Daniel said evenly. Langford laughed, a genuine laugh that transformed his face. That's part of it, certainly. But it's more than that. It's the story, the hidden talent, the working-class hero, the dignity in the face of mockery. People are calling it the most moving performance they've ever seen. The Times wants an exclusive. The Today Show wants you on tomorrow. Carnegie Hall has already called asking about your availability. Mr. Langford. Victor, please. I think we're past formalities. He leaned forward. Daniel, I'm going to be straight with you. I'm an ass. I know it. Most people know it. My ex-wives certainly know it. But I'm also not stupid. What happened last night was my fault. I tried to humiliate you for sport, and instead you gave everyone in that room a gift they'll never forget. It wasn't a gift, Daniel said. It was just music. No, it was more than that. It was a reminder that talent, real talent, doesn't care about bank accounts or pedigree. That beauty can come from unexpected places. Victor stood and walked to the window. I built my fortune by seeing potential where others didn't. Empty lots that could become luxury towers, rundown neighborhoods that could be transformed. But I never saw the potential that was right in front of me cleaning my office. He turned back to Daniel. I want to make this right. First an apology, a real one. I'm sorry for last night and for every night before that when I treated you as less than human. Second, an offer. Daniel tensed. The hall sponsors a resident artist program, Victor continued. It's been vacant for 2 years because we couldn't find the right person. The position comes with a salary, a real salary, not minimum wage health benefits, and a budget for performances. You'd be required to perform 4 times a year in the main hall, plus educational outreach in schools. The rest of your time would be your own to practice, to compose, to teach private students if you wish. Daniel couldn't breathe. Mr. Langford, Victor, I don't have a doctorate. I never finished. You think I care about a piece of paper I heard you play? That's all the qualification you need. Victor returned to his desk, pulling out a contract. The salary is $75,000 a year to start. I know it's not what top pianists make, but it's more than I've made in the last 5 years combined, Daniel said quietly. There's more. We'll create a scholarship in your wife's name, the Maria Cruz Memorial Scholarship for young pianists from working-class families. And your daughter Lila, right? She'll have free access to any educational programs the hall offers. Daniel stared at the contract, the numbers and words blurring together. It was everything he'd dreamed of 5 years ago before Maria died, before reality crushed those dreams into dust. Why? He asked. Why are you doing this? Victor was quiet for a moment. Because I have a daughter too. Had. Emily. She was a violinist talented like you, but I pushed her toward business, toward practical things, told her music was a hobby, not a career. She went to Wharton, got her MBA, worked at my company for exactly 1 year, then killed herself. His voice was steady, but his hands trembled slightly. She left a note. Said she'd rather die than live a life without music. Said I'd killed her soul long before she killed her body. The office fell silent except for the distant sound of traffic. I can't bring Emily back, Victor continued, but I can make sure other artists don't have to choose between their gift and survival. You shouldn't have had to give up music to raise your daughter. The fact that you did says everything about your character, but the fact that you had to is an indictment of all of us. Daniel thought of Lila probably down in the concert hall with Margaret right now. Thought of the tiny apartment in Queens, the constant worry about money, the dreams he'd buried so deep he'd thought they were dead. Can I think about it? He asked. Of course. But Victor's phone rang. He looked at it and frowned. It's the Times again. They're persistent. He declined the call. The world wants to hear your story, to hear you play. Don't make them wait too long. Daniel stood to leave, then paused. The video who took it? Half the room, apparently. But the first one, the one that went viral. That was my assistant. She said she started recording to capture my humiliation when you failed. Instead, she captured something else entirely. He smiled ruefully. She also quit this morning, by the way. Said she couldn't work for someone who treated people the way I treated you. So you've cost me an excellent assistant, but I suppose I deserve that. Daniel left the office in a daze. He found Margaret and Lila in the concert hall, Lila sitting at the piano, her small fingers picking out a simple melody. She has natural ability, Margaret said quietly. Have you thought about lessons for her? We couldn't afford? Daniel began, then stopped. If he took Victor's offer, they could afford it. They could afford many things. Daddy, Lila called out. Margaret showed me the video. You were amazing. Why didn't you ever tell me you could play like that? Daniel walked to the piano and sat beside his daughter on the bench. Sometimes we forget parts of ourselves, he said. Sometimes we have to put them away for a while. But music, real music, it never really leaves us. Will you teach me? Lila asked. To play like you. Daniel put his arm around her. If you want to learn. I want to learn everything, she said fiercely. I want to play like you and Mom did. Daniel's throat tightened. He'd never played for Lila, had never even told her that Maria had been a singer, that they'd met at the conservatory, that their apartment in Boston had been filled with music from morning to night. Your mom had the most beautiful voice, he said softly. She could make people cry just by humming. Really? Really? She sang to you every day when you were growing inside her. Said she wanted you to be born knowing you were loved. Lila leaned against him. Play something for her. For Mom. Daniel looked at Margaret, who nodded encouragingly. He placed his hands on the keys and began to play not Chopin or Rachmaninoff, but a simple melody Maria used to sing, a Portuguese lullaby her grandmother had taught her. As he played, he could almost hear her voice, feel her presence, as if the music had summoned her spirit into the hall. Lila began to hum along, though she couldn't know the melody. But perhaps Daniel thought she did know it. Perhaps it had been sung to her so many times in the womb that it lived in her bones the way music lived in his. When he finished, all three of them were crying. Take the job, Daddy, Lila whispered. Take it for Mom. Daniel looked at his daughter, at Margaret at the piano that had changed everything in a single night. He thought about the 5 years of invisibility, of safety, of quiet survival. Then he thought about the feeling of the keys under his fingers, the sound of applause, the faces of people truly seeing him for the first time. But most of all, he thought about Maria, about the life they'd planned, the dreams they'd shared. She wouldn't want him to live in the shadows. She'd want him to play, to fill the world with music, to show their daughter that dreams, even deferred ones, were worth pursuing. Okay, he said quietly. Okay. Margaret squeezed his shoulder. Lila hugged him tight. And somewhere Daniel was certain Maria was smiling. His phone, still turned off, held 57 messages. The world wanted to hear from the janitor who played like an angel, but for now, in this moment, Daniel Cruz was exactly where he needed to be, at a piano with his daughter, ready to begin again. The afternoon sun streamed through the tall windows, casting long shadows across the stage. Daniel began to play again, this time a piece he improvised on the spot. Something new, something hopeful, something that spoke of second chances and unexpected grace. Lila watched his hands, memorizing the movements, already imagining the day she would play beside him. Margaret stood in the wings making plans. There would be a concert, she decided. A proper one, with publicity and programs, and Daniel in a tuxedo instead of coveralls. They would fill this hall with people who came specifically to hear him play not as a curiosity or human interest story, but as the artist he had always been. As the music filled the hall, other staff members began to drift in. The security guard from the morning shift, 2 maintenance workers who had taken over Daniel's duties for the day, the assistant conductor of the youth orchestra who had heard the news. They all stood quietly, respectfully listening to something they recognized as precious, not just the music, but the moment of transformation, the instant when someone stops being who they were forced to become and starts being who they were meant to be. Daniel played for an hour, 2 hours, losing track of time. His fingers relearned their strength, their precision, their capacity for expression. With each piece, he felt layers of grief and resignation falling away like old paint, revealing something bright and vital underneath. Finally exhausted but exhilarated, he stopped. The small audience applauded, and Daniel stood bowing formally as he had been taught to do so many years ago. But this time the bow felt different. It wasn't the bow of a performer to an audience, but of one human being acknowledging others of gratitude given and received. "Mr. Cruz," one of the maintenance workers called out, "just so you know, we're all proud of you. And if you take that fancy new job, we won't hold it against you." He grinned. "Much." Daniel laughed, really laughed for the first time in years. "Thanks, Tom. But you know what? I'll still know where all the best hiding spots are for when you need a break." "Once maintenance, always maintenance," Tom agreed. "You just clean up different messes now." As the impromptu audience dispersed, Daniel realized something. For 5 years, he'd thought he was invisible to these people, but they had seen him, maybe not the pianist, but the man who showed up every day, who did his job with dignity, who never complained despite having every reason to. They had respected him long before they knew he could play. He took Lila's hand, ready to leave to go home and think about everything that had happened. But as they walked toward the exit, a woman entered the hall, elderly, elegant, moving with the careful precision of someone fighting against age. "Mr. Cruz," she called out in accented English. Russian, Daniel thought. "Yes." She approached slowly, her eyes fixed on his face with an intensity that made him uncomfortable. When she reached him, she stood for a moment, just looking. "You don't know me," she said finally, "but I knew your wife. Maria sang in my studio recital at the conservatory a month before she died." Daniel's breath caught. "You're Professor Volkov, Mikhail Volkov's widow." "Yes." "Natasha." She reached out and touched his face gently, a gesture so maternal it made his eyes water. "Maria spoke of you constantly, her brilliant pianist husband. She was so proud, so excited about your future together." Her hand dropped. "When I heard about the accident, I tried to find you, but you had disappeared." "I had a daughter to raise," Daniel said quietly. "Priorities changed." "No," Natasha said firmly. "Priorities expanded. There is a difference." She looked at Lila. "You have your mother's eyes, little one, and I suspect your father's hands. Do you play?" "He's going to teach me," Lila said shyly. "Good. Music is inheritance passed from one generation to the next. It should not die with us." She turned back to Daniel. "I saw the video this morning. My husband would have wept to hear you play that ballade. He always said the best pianists were those who had lived, who had suffered, who had something to say beyond the notes." She reached into her purse and pulled out an old program yellowed with age. "From Maria's recital. I've kept it all these years. I thought perhaps you would want it." Daniel took it with trembling hands. There was Maria's name listed among the sopranos. The date was 2 weeks before she died. "She sang Puccini that night," Natasha continued. "O mio babbino caro." She dedicated it to you and your unborn child. Said she wanted her baby to hear her sing at least once in a proper hall. She smiled sadly. "I suppose in a way she did." Lila took the program from Daniel's shaking hands, studying it with wonder. "That's my mom's name," she said softly. "Maria Elena Cruz." "She was radiant that night," Natasha said. Glowing with happiness and promise, the audience gave her a standing ovation. "I remember thinking that she and your father would conquer the world together." "We were so young," Daniel whispered, "so certain everything would work out." "You are still young," Natasha said firmly. 42 is nothing in the life of an artist. Rubinstein played until he was 90, Horowitz until he died. You have decades ahead of you, Mr. Cruz, decades to make the music you and Maria dreamed of. She turned to leave, then paused. I teach now privately only a few students. If your daughter is interested, I would be honored to help guide her. No fee, consider it a debt to Maria's memory. Before Daniel could respond, she was gone, moving through the hall with the same regal bearing that had made her husband legendary. Daniel stood holding Lila's hand, the program clutched in his other hand, feeling as if the universe was conspiring to push him back toward music. Every door he'd thought closed was opening. Every bridge he'd thought burned was rebuilding itself. Daddy, Lila said quietly, I think Mom would want you to be happy. I am happy. I have you. But you could be happier. You could have me and music. She looked up at him with eyes that were indeed Maria's dark, intelligent seeing too much. I don't want you to give up things for me anymore. I want you to show me how to reach for things instead. Daniel knelt down and hugged his daughter tight, breathing in the scent of her shampoo, feeling the solid reality of her in his arms. She was right, of course. Children always knew the truth that adults tried to complicate. Okay, he said into her hair. We'll reach together. They left the hall as the sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of rose and gold. The city rushed around them indifferent and eternal, but Daniel felt like he was walking through a different world than the one he'd inhabited that morning. Same streets, same buildings, same crowds, but everything had shifted as if someone had adjusted the focus and brought it all into clarity. Back in their apartment that night after dinner and homework and all the normal routines that shaped their life, Daniel sat at the old keyboard he'd played in the early morning hours. But this time he didn't turn the volume down. He played at full volume, letting the music fill their small space spill out the windows, announced to anyone who cared to listen that Daniel Cruz was a pianist again. Lila sat beside him, her head on his shoulder, humming along to melodies she was only just learning. On the wall, Maria smiled down from her photograph, and Daniel could almost hear her voice joining in, completing the harmony that had been broken but was slowly, carefully being rebuilt. His phone buzzed with another message. The counter showed 127 unread texts now. Tomorrow he would deal with them. Tomorrow he would call Victor Langford and accept the position. Tomorrow he would step into whatever spotlight the world wanted to shine on him. But tonight he was just a father playing piano with his daughter, filling their home with music for the first time in 5 years, letting the notes wash away the dust of grief and reveal what had always been there underneath: love, hope, and the unbreakable bonds that connect one soul to another through melody and memory. Outside their window, the city played its own symphony sirens and car horns and distant music from other apartments. But inside, Daniel and Lila created their own world of sound, a fortress of music that held them safe and promised that tomorrow would be different, would be better, would be filled with possibilities that had seemed dead but were only sleeping, waiting for the right moment to wake. The next morning arrived with a thunderstorm that rattled the windows and turned the streets into rivers. Daniel woke to find Lila already dressed, standing by his bed with a cup of coffee. She'd made herself too much sugar, not enough milk, but perfect in its intention. "You have 183 messages now," she announced, holding his phone. "Also, there's a man from the New York Times in our living room." Daniel sat up so fast he nearly spilled the coffee. "What? He knocked 20 minutes ago, said he'd wait. I gave him orange juice." She paused. "The expired kind from last week. Was that mean?" Despite everything, Daniel laughed. "A little. Did you let a stranger into our apartment?" "Mrs. Chen is with him. She's telling him about how you helped fix her sink last year and wouldn't take any money for it." Lila sat on the edge of his bed. "Daddy, are we going to be famous now?" Daniel pulled her close. "No, baby. I might get some attention for a while, but fame isn't what this is about. It's about getting to do what I love while still taking care of what I love most." He kissed the top of her head. "Which is you." "I know," she said matter-of-factly. "But can we at least get a piano that doesn't sound like a dying cat?" "That's the first thing we'll do," Daniel promised. He dressed quickly in his only decent pants and a shirt Lila had given him for Christmas. Light blue, she said it made his eyes look less tired, and entered the living room to find Mrs. Chen holding court with a young man who looked desperately uncomfortable on their worn couch. "Ah, Daniel," Mrs. Chen exclaimed. "I was just telling Mr. Patterson here about the time you played piano for my grandson's birthday. You remember you pretended you didn't know how to play, then surprised everyone with that beautiful Chinese song my mother used to sing." The reporter Patterson stood quickly, extending his hand. He was younger than Daniel expected, maybe 30, with the eager look of someone trying to make their mark. "Mr. Cruz, I'm James Patterson from the Times. I know this is intrusive, showing up like this, but your story, it's extraordinary. People need to hear it." "People have heard it," Daniel said carefully. 3 million of them, apparently. "They've seen a video. They haven't heard your story." Patterson pulled out a recorder. "The real story, about your wife, your daughter, the choices you made. This isn't just about a janitor who can play piano. It's about the cost of survival in America, about art versus commerce, about what we sacrifice and why." Mrs. Chen stood. "I'll leave you to talk. Lila, come help me make proper coffee. This young man has been drinking your father's orange juice for 20 minutes and hasn't complained once. He deserves better." As they left, Daniel sat across from Patterson, studying him. "Why do you care?" "Because my mother was a dancer," Patterson said quietly. "Ballet. She was good enough for the American Ballet Theater, but she got pregnant with me at 19. She became a waitress instead. Died when I was 15, never having danced professionally again. I grew up watching her watch ballet on TV, seeing her feet move under the table, practicing positions she'd never perform." He met Daniel's eyes. "Your story isn't unique, Mr. Cruz. That's what makes it important. You're one of thousands, maybe millions, who had to choose between art and survival. But you're the one who got caught on video. You're the one who can speak for all of them." Daniel was quiet for a long moment, listening to the rain against the windows, thinking about all the other Daniel Cruzes out there mopping floors and driving buses and waiting tables, their talents buried under the weight of necessity. "What do you want to know?" he asked finally. Patterson clicked on his recorder. "Everything. Start from the beginning." For the next 2 hours, Daniel talked. He told Patterson about meeting Maria at the conservatory, about their dreams of performing together, him on piano, her singing, about the wedding they couldn't afford, so they got married at City Hall with 2 witnesses they pulled off the street, about the apartment in Boston where they'd practiced until the neighbors complained, then practiced softer, then practiced in their heads when even that was too much. He talked about Maria's pregnancy, how she'd sung every day to their unborn child, convinced that babies could hear music in the womb, that they could be born already knowing beauty. About the night she went to the store for ice cream, she'd been craving strawberry all week, and never came home. The police came to the hospital. Daniel said, his voice steady but his hands shaking. "I was in the middle of a practice session for my doctoral recital. They said there had been an accident, said it was quick. Said she didn't suffer." He looked at Patterson. "Do they tell everyone that their loved one didn't suffer, or do they save it for the ones who look like they might fall apart completely?" Patterson said nothing, just kept the recorder running. Daniel talked about Lila's birth, about holding his premature daughter, while machines helped her breathe, about the moment he realized he was all she had in the world. About selling everything, his piano, Maria's jewelry, even his tuxedo to pay for the funeral and the medical bills. About the moment he'd walked into Harrington Concert Hall looking for any job they had, and the relief when they offered him maintenance work with benefits. "The first time I cleaned the hall after a performance," Daniel said, "I found a program on the floor. Brahms' Piano Concerto No. 2. I'd been scheduled to perform it the following year. I threw it in the trash with the rest of the debris. It felt like throwing away a piece of myself, but also like relief. Like I could stop pretending I'd ever be that person again." Lila returned with coffee made properly this time and sat beside Daniel, taking his hand. Patterson noticed the gesture, the way she protected him, even as he told his story. "What was it like," Patterson asked, "playing again that night?" "After 5 years?" Daniel thought about it. "Like drowning in reverse, like breaking the surface and remembering what air tasted like, but also terrifying. Because if I could still play like that, what did it mean about the years I didn't? Were they wasted, Or were they invested in something more important? He squeezed Lila's hand. I still don't know the answer. Patterson turned to Lila. What do you think about all this? I think my dad is a hero, Lila said simply. Not because he can play piano, but because he didn't. Because he chose me instead. But I also think heroes deserve happy endings, and maybe this is his. Patterson smiled for the first time. That's a good quote. Can I use it? It'll cost you, Lila said seriously. We need a new piano. Daniel was about to scold her when Patterson laughed. Fair enough. Mr. Cruz, what happens now, I know Langford offered you a position. I'm accepting it, Daniel said. I called him this morning. This was news to Lila, who bounced in her seat. Really? Daddy, really? Really, we're also moving. Closer to the hall, better schools for you. He looked at Patterson. But I want to be clear about something. This isn't a fairy tale. I'm not suddenly going to be playing at Carnegie Hall or recording albums. I'm a 42-year-old pianist who's been out of practice for 5 years. What Langford's offering is a chance to play again, to teach, to be part of the musical community. That's miracle enough. Patterson nodded, making notes. The video has sparked a huge conversation online about class and art in America. What do you want to say to people who see you as a symbol? That I'm not a symbol. I'm just a father who did what he had to do. If that resonates with people, maybe it's because we live in a world where too many people have to make impossible choices between passion and survival. Daniel stood, indicating the interview was over. The real story isn't that a janitor can play piano, it's that a pianist had to become a janitor. That's the tragedy. What happened 3 nights ago, that's just the correction. Patterson stood as well, turning off his recorder. The piece will run in Sunday's arts section. Front page, I think. He paused at the door. My editor wants me to ask, will you perform publicly beyond the hall's resident artist concerts? Daniel looked at Lila, who nodded enthusiastically. We'll see, he said. I need to remember how to be a pianist first. Then maybe I can remember how to be a performer. After Patterson left, Daniel and Lila sat in their small living room, the rain still pattering against the windows. The apartment felt different now, like it was already part of their past rather than their present. When do we move? Lila asked. Langford found us a place. 2 bedrooms in Lincoln Square. The building has a music room where I can practice without bothering anyone. Daniel pulled her close. Are you okay with all this change? Daddy, I've been waiting for you to be happy again for as long as I can remember. If this makes you happy, then I'm more than okay. The phone rang. Daniel saw it was Harrington Concert Hall and answered. Daniel? It was Margaret, and she sounded frantic. Can you come in? Now something's happened. Daniel's stomach dropped. What's wrong? Nothing's wrong. Everything's incredible. Just get here. Bring Lila. They took the subway. Daniel's anxiety growing with each stop. Had Langford changed his mind? Had something happened to the Steinway? 1,000 disasters played through his mind. But when they arrived at the hall, they found it transformed. The lobby was full of flowers, hundreds of bouquets, arrangements, single roses. Margaret stood in the middle of it all, looking overwhelmed. They started arriving this morning, she said. From all over the world. That couple from Germany who saw the video sent those orchids. A music school in Japan sent the cherry blossoms. And look at this. She handed him a card. It was from the Vienna Philharmonic. To Daniel Cruz. It read, who reminds us that music lives not in concert halls but in the human heart. An invitation stands whenever you wish to visit Vienna. Daddy, look. Lila had found a section devoted entirely to letters and cards. Hundreds of them, maybe thousands. She opened one at random and read, Dear Mr. Cruz, I quit piano when my husband died because it hurt too much to play. After seeing your video, I played for the first time in 10 years. Thank you for reminding me that music survives grief. Daniel picked up another, I'm a janitor at a high school in Ohio. I've never told anyone I have a degree in chemical engineering. Your courage in revealing yourself has inspired me to apply for teaching positions again. And another, my daughter wants to be a singer, but I've been pushing her toward practical careers. After seeing what you sacrificed and how it dimmed your light for so long, I've decided to support her dreams. Margaret touched his arm. There's more. Victor's assistant, his new one, has been fielding calls all morning. The London Symphony wants to know if you'd consider a guest performance. The Juilliard School wants to offer you an honorary doctorate. And she paused for effect. Vladimir Ashkenazy's management called. He wants to know if you'd consider performing a duet with him at his farewell concert next year. Daniel had to sit down. Ashkenazy was one of the greatest living pianists, someone he'd idolized as a student. This is insane. This is what happens when you touch people's souls, Margaret said. But Daniel, you need to see something else. She led them to her office where a laptop was open to a crowdfunding page. The title read, The Daniel Cruz Music Education Fund. The current amount raised was $847,000. Someone started it yesterday, Margaret explained. The goal was to raise money for music education for underprivileged kids. It's already approaching $1 million. They want you to run it. Daniel stared at the screen, unable to process the numbers. I don't understand any of this. I do, Lila said quietly. You showed people that anyone can be extraordinary, that janitors and waitresses and all the invisible people might be hiding something beautiful. You made them believe in possibility again. A knock at the door interrupted them. Victor Langford entered, looking unusually subdued. Daniel, good you're here. We need to discuss something. He glanced at Margaret and Lila. Privately, if you don't mind. Margaret took Lila's hand. Come on, let's go look at the rest of the flowers. I think I saw some that play music when you touch them. When they were alone, Victor sat down heavily. Daniel, I need to be honest with you about something. The position I offered, it's already getting pushback from some board members. They think I'm being reactive, making decisions based on viral videos rather than proper protocols. Daniel's heart sank. So the offer's withdrawn. God, no, the opposite. I'm doubling down. But I need you to understand what you're walking into. Some people will see you as a diversity hire, a publicity stunt. They'll minimize your talent, say you're only here because of the video. Victor leaned forward. I know what it's like to be dismissed, to have to prove yourself twice as hard as everyone else. My father was a construction worker. I built my empire while people called me new money, and worse. The difference is I could buy my way to respect. You'll have to play your way there. I've been proving myself for 5 years, Daniel said. What's a little more? Victor smiled. That's what I hoped you'd say. There's something else. The board wants to hear you play, formally. A proper concert, not a spontaneous performance. They want to know if you can handle the pressure of a scheduled advertised event. When cheat, 2 weeks. I know it's soon, but I'll do it. Victor studied him. You sure this isn't just playing for donors who've had too much wine? This is critics, professional musicians, people who will be looking for any weakness. Mr. Langford, Victor. I spent 5 years believing I was weak for choosing stability over art. But now I realize that was strength. Raising Lila alone, that was strength. Showing up every day to a job that made me invisible, that was strength. Playing piano for a room full of people who were laughing at me, that was easy compared to everything else. Victor stood, extending his hand. Then let's make it official. Welcome to the Harrington Concert Hall Family Maestro Cruise. Daniel shook his hand, noting the title. I'm not a maestro. You will be. I've hired Natasha Volkov to work with you for the next 2 weeks. She said you already knew each other. She knew my wife. She speaks highly of you, said you had the hands of an angel and the heart of a warrior. I have no idea what that means, but it sounded impressive. They left the office to find the lobby even more crowded than before. Someone had set up a small TV which was playing a news segment about Daniel. The reporter was interviewing people on the street, asking if they'd seen the video. It made me cry, one woman said. My dad was a saxophone player who became an accountant to support us. He died without ever playing professionally. It's about respect, a man in a hard hat said. That rich guy tried to humiliate someone he thought was beneath him and got schooled. We need more of that. A teenager looked directly at the camera. It means maybe I don't have to give up on dance just because my parents want me to be a doctor. Daniel turned away from the screen to find Lila watching him. You did that, she said. You gave them permission to hope. I just played piano. No, Daddy, you stood up. After being knocked down for so long, you stood up. That's what they needed to see. The rest of the day passed in a blur of phone calls, meetings, and preparations. Victor's assistant scheduled interviews with what seemed like every media outlet in existence. Margaret coordinated with the PR team about the concert in 2 weeks. Someone from wardrobe came to measure Daniel for a tuxedo. "I have a tux," Daniel protested. "You have a tux from 2018, the wardrobe assistant said. "This is 2005. Plus you've lost weight, stress, or poverty." "Both." "Well, we'll fix that. A pianist should look like he owns the stage, not like he's borrowing it." By evening, Daniel was exhausted. He and Lila had dinner at a small restaurant near the hall. Nothing fancy, just pasta and salad, but it felt like a celebration nonetheless. "Daddy," Lila said, between bites of spaghetti. "Are you scared about the concert?" "Terrified." "Good. Mom used to say fear meant you were about to do something important." Daniel smiled. "When did she say that?" "I don't know. I just remember it." Lila looked thoughtful. "Or maybe I made it up. Sometimes I can't tell what's a real memory and what's something I created because I wanted to remember her." Daniel reached across the table and took her hand. "Both are real. The memories we create are just as valid as the ones we recall. Your mother lives in both." That night back in their apartment, Daniel sat at the old keyboard while Lila did homework. But instead of playing, he just sat there, hands resting on the keys, thinking about everything that had happened in the past 72 hours. The video had now been viewed 8 million times. The crowdfunding had passed $1 million. He had job offers from 3 conservatories, 2 orchestras, and a recording studio. The apartment was so full of flowers, they'd had to donate most of them to a nearby hospital. But what struck Daniel most was a simple comment on the video buried among thousands of others. It read, "My dad is a janitor. After seeing this, I'm going to ask him what he dreamed of being before I came along." That comment Daniel thought was worth more than all the job offers and flowers combined. It represented a shift in perspective, a recognition that every person carrying a mop or serving coffee or driving a bus had a story, had dreams, had talents that circumstances might have buried but not destroyed. His phone rang. It was Natasha Volkov. "Daniel, I've watched your performance 17 times now. You have exceptional technique, but more importantly, you have something that cannot be taught: authenticity. When you play, you tell the truth. That's rare." "Thank you, Professor." "Natasha, please." Now for your concert, I suggest Beethoven's Appassionata Liszt's Consolation No. 3. And yes, the Chopin Ballade again. Show them range, power, delicacy, and narrative. Can you be here tomorrow at 9? We have much work to do. I have to arrange care for Lila. Bring her. I'll teach her while you practice. 2 students for the price of none, as I'm not charging you. Natasha, I can't accept. You can and you will. Maria would haunt me if I didn't help you now. Besides, I'm old and rich and bored. This gives me purpose. Don't deny an old woman her purpose. After she hung up, Daniel looked at Lila, who was pretending to do homework while obviously eavesdropping. Looks like you're starting piano lessons tomorrow. Lila grinned. With the Russian lady, she seems scary but nice. That's probably accurate. Daniel finally placed his hands on the keys, beginning to play scales, the foundation of all technique. Want to learn your first lesson now? Lila abandoned her homework, immediately squeezing onto the bench beside him. Daniel positioned her hands, showing her middle C, explaining the basics of posture and hand position. The most important thing, he said, is to play from your heart. Technique can be learned, theory can be studied, but music, real music, comes from something deeper. Your mom knew that. She could make people cry with a single note because she meant it, because she felt it. Do you think I inherited that? I think you inherited the best of both of us. Her passion and my stubbornness. Or your passion and her stubbornness. That too. They practiced together until Lila's bedtime, Daniel teaching her a simple melody with her right hand while he played harmony with his left. It was the same song he'd planned to teach their child when Maria was pregnant, a little piece he'd composed during those hopeful months. What's this song called? Lila asked. I never named it. Can we call it Mom's Song? That's perfect. As Lila got ready for bed, Daniel received a text from Victor. Times article goes online at midnight. Brace yourself. Daniel opened his laptop at 11:59, refreshing the page until the article appeared. The headline read, "The Janitor Who Reminded America That Art Isn't a Luxury, It's a Necessity." The article was thorough, compassionate, and devastating in its indictment of a system that forced artists to choose between their gifts and survival. Patterson had woven Daniel's story with statistics about artists living below the poverty line, about the death of arts education in public schools, about the way America simultaneously celebrated and punished creativity. But the final paragraph was what made Daniel's throat tight. Daniel Cruz's story isn't remarkable because a janitor could play piano. It's remarkable because it took public humiliation for anyone to notice. How many other Daniel Cruzes are out there, their talents hidden behind mops and aprons and uniforms? How many symphonies go unwritten, paintings, unpainted stories, untold because their creators are too busy surviving to create Cruz's performance? It wasn't just music, it was an indictment of our values and a call to recognize the artists among us hiding in plain sight, waiting for someone to finally see them. Daniel closed the laptop and went to check on Lila one more time. She was asleep, but her fingers were moving against her blanket, practicing the melody he'd taught her even in dreams. "Your daddy's going to play in a big concert," he whispered, "and someday you will too. But more importantly, we're going to make sure other kids get the chance to discover if they have music inside them." He thought about the crowdfunding now approaching $2 million. Tomorrow, he would figure out how to use it, how to create programs that would prevent other children from having to watch their parents sacrifice their dreams. But tonight, he returned to his keyboard one more time, playing softly in the darkness. Not the classical pieces he'd perform in 2 weeks, but something new. A composition taking shape in his mind. A piece that told the story of loss and redemption, of silence and song, of the moment when the invisible become visible. Outside New York continued its relentless pace, unaware that in a small apartment in Queens, a revolution was beginning, not with protests or politics, but with a father playing piano while his daughter slept, reclaiming a dream he'd thought was dead. Proving that sometimes the most powerful act of rebellion is simply refusing to stay silent any longer. The practice room at Natasha Volkov's apartment was unlike anything Daniel had seen outside a conservatory. The walls were lined with acoustic panels, 2 grand pianos sat facing each other like old friends in conversation, and photographs of legendary pianists watched from every surface. Mikhail Volkov's portrait dominated the far wall, his intense eyes seeming to follow every movement. "You're late," Natasha announced when Daniel and Lila arrived at 9:15, though her tone held more amusement than reproach. "Traffic is an excuse for amateurs, not artists." "The subway broke down," Lila offered, still intimidated by the elegant woman in her severe black dress. "Then one takes a taxi, or walks, or flies if necessary." Natasha turned to Daniel. "Your hands, show me." Daniel extended his hands, and she examined them like a doctor, turning them over, pressing the tendons, checking the flexibility of each joint. 5 years of manual labor, she murmured, but also 5 years of consistent movement. Not the worst thing. Chopin's hands were small, Rachmaninoff's were enormous, but yours are built for Beethoven. Strong, but sensitive. She released them. "We begin with scales. 4 octaves, all major and minor contrary motion." "I know how to play scales," Daniel said gently. "You know how to play notes in sequence. I will teach you to play scales." She sat at one of the pianos. "Listen." What followed was a revelation. Natasha played a simple C major scale, but it sang like a melody. Each note perfectly weighted the progression, not mechanical but musical. It was the difference between walking and dancing. "Every note must have intention," she said. "Even in exercises. Especially in exercises. Now you." For the next hour, she deconstructed everything Daniel thought he knew about technique, rebuilding it from the foundation up. Meanwhile, Lila sat at the second piano with a book of beginner exercises, occasionally receiving corrections from Natasha that were both stern and kind. "No, little one. The thumb is not a hammer. It is a singer, just quieter than the others." Again. By noon, Daniel's forearms ached in ways they hadn't since his conservatory days. Natasha finally allowed a break, serving tea from an ornate samovar, that had belonged to her grandmother in Russia. "Tell me about the program for your concert," she said, settling into a chair that looked like it belonged in a museum. "Beethoven's Appassionata Liszt's Consolation No. 3 and the Chopin Ballade." Safe choices, predictable. She sipped her tea. "You're thinking like a student, not an artist. What do you want to say with this concert?" Daniel considered. "That I survived, that the music survived." "Then play pieces that nearly didn't survive. Beethoven wrote the Appassionata while going deaf, play that. But also play something unexpected. Gershwin, perhaps? Or better yet, something you've written." "I don't compose." "Lies." "I heard you playing something original on that video someone took from the hallway, after the official performance when you thought no one was listening." Daniel flushed. He hadn't known anyone had recorded that the quiet improvisation he'd played while alone processing everything that had happened. That was just processing. All composition is processing. You have 2 weeks. Write something. Pour your story into notes instead of words. She turned to Lila. "Your father's afraid of his own voice. Help him find it." "He's not afraid," Lila protested. "He's the bravest person I know." "Brave in life, perhaps, but in art, that remains to be seen." Natasha stood. "Tomorrow, same time. And Daniel? The world doesn't need another competent pianist. It needs someone who can make them feel what you felt. Don't give them perfection. Give them truth." The walk home was quiet, both Daniel and Lila lost in thought. As they passed a music store, Lila stopped. "Daddy, look." In the window was a display featuring the now famous photograph from the gala Daniel at the piano in his janitor's uniform. Hands blurred with movement, face transformed by the music. Above it, a sign read, "Music lives everywhere. Instruments for every budget inside." "We should get a real piano," Lila said, "for the new apartment." "That's a big expense." "You have a job now, a real one, and all those people want to hire you for concerts." She looked up at him. "You're allowed to have nice things now, Daddy. You're allowed to stop punishing yourself." The words hit Daniel like a physical blow. He hadn't realized that's what he'd been doing, punishing himself for surviving when Maria hadn't, for having to choose between art and fatherhood for all the ways life had fallen short of their dreams. They entered the store where the owner immediately recognized them. "Mr. Cruz, I was hoping you'd come in. I'm Robert Chen. I was at the gala that night. Please let me show you our pianos." What followed was 2 hours of Daniel playing various instruments, while Lila offered commentary with the confidence of someone who'd been taking lessons for years rather than hours. They finally settled on a restored Yamaha Grand, its tone warm and responsive. "I can't afford," Daniel began. "Actually," Robert interrupted. "I've had 3 customers today asking if you'd played any of our pianos. If I could put a small plaque saying you selected this instrument, I'd consider it an even trade." "That's ridiculous. This piano is worth less than the advertising value of your endorsement. Please, Mr. Cruz, let me be part of your story, even in this small way." Daniel looked at Lila, who was already sitting at the bench, running her fingers over the keys with reverence. "Okay," he said quietly. "Thank you." The piano would be delivered to their new apartment the following week. As they left the store, Daniel's phone rang. It was Victor. "Bad news. Timothy Walker's father is raising hell about Lila punching his son. He's threatening to use it to block your appointment, saying we can't have someone violent associated with the hall." Daniel's blood ran cold. "She's 10 years old. She was defending me." "I know, but Walker's a major donor. He's got influence." Victor paused. Unless what?" "Meet with him. Tonight. His office. Bring Lila." "Absolutely not. I won't subject her to—" "Trust me, Daniel. I know men like Walker. Hell, I am men like Walker, but I also know their weaknesses. 7 o'clock. I'll text you the address." Daniel looked at Lila, who'd heard everything despite the phone not being on speaker. "I want to go," she said firmly. "I want to look at the man who raised a bully and tell him exactly what his son said about you." "Lila." "No, Daddy. You stood up for yourself at the piano. Let me stand up for you with words." That evening, they took a taxi to Walker's office in a gleaming tower in the financial district. The receptionist looked at them with barely concealed disdain, Daniel in his old suit, Lila in her school clothes, but showed them to a conference room where Thomas Walker waited. He was exactly what Daniel expected. Mid-50s expensive suit, the kind of aggressive handsomeness that money could maintain. His son Timothy stood beside him, a bandage across his nose. So, Walker began without preamble, the janitor and his violent daughter. The pianist and his protective daughter, Daniel corrected quietly. Walker laughed. Pianist, right. One performance doesn't make you a pianist cruise. Any more than one punch makes your daughter a boxer. He leaned forward. Here's what's going to happen. You're going to decline Langford's offer. You're going to go back to pushing a mop, and we're all going to forget this embarrassing episode. Why? Daniel asked simply. Because if you don't, I'll make sure every private school in New York knows about your daughter's violent tendencies. I'll make sure Child Services investigates whether a single father working night shifts can properly care for a child. I'll make your lives miserable. Lila stood up. May I say something? Walker smirked. By all means. Your son told me my father was just a servant pretending to be something better. He said people like us exist to clean up after people like you. He said my mom probably killed herself to get away from my dad. Lila's voice was steady, but tears ran down her cheeks. I shouldn't have hit him. Violence is wrong, but your son is cruel because you taught him to be cruel, and you're trying to hurt my dad because he made you look small. But he didn't make you look small. You are small. The room fell silent. Timothy Walker had gone pale, looking at his father with something like fear. I didn't say that about her mom, Timothy whispered. I didn't know her mom was dead. You said it, Lila replied. Maybe you didn't know the details, but you knew you were being cruel. Walker's phone buzzed. He looked at it, and his face went white. He showed it to his son, who gasped. What? Daniel asked. Walker turned the phone around. It was a video posted 40 minutes ago already with 200,000 views. The title, Hedge Fund Manager Threatens Janitor Pianist and His 10-year-old Daughter. The video showed them entering the building, clearly filmed by someone in the lobby. The description read, Thomas Walker, who publicly mocked Daniel Cruz at the gala, now trying to silence him. Security footage from inside coming soon if he doesn't back down. That's illegal, Walker sputtered. Recording without consent is perfectly legal in a public lobby, Victor Langford said, entering the room with a smile sharp enough to cut glass. Hello, Thomas. Threatening children now, are we? Victor, this is none of your business. Everything involving my concert hall is my business, and Daniel is my newest artist in residence, which makes him and his daughter under my protection. Victor sat down casually, but Daniel could see the tension in his shoulders. Here's what's actually going to happen, Thomas. You're going to apologize to Lila for your son's behavior and for your threats. Timothy is going to apologize for his cruelty. Then you're going to go home and think very carefully about the kind of man you want to be and the kind of son you're raising. Or I'll release the audio recording I have of this entire conversation. Did you really think I'd send Daniel here without backup? Victor pulled out his phone, hit play. Walker's voice filled the room. I'll make sure Child Services investigates. Walker stood abruptly. This is extortion. This is protection. There's a difference. Victor stood as well. Thomas, we've known each other for 15 years. We've made money together, lost money together. But if you come after Daniel or Lila again, I will end you. Not financially, that would be too easy. I'll end you socially. Every club, every board, every charity gala, you'll be persona non grata. Your son will find his prep school applications mysteriously rejected. Your wife will wonder why her friends stop returning her calls. He paused. Or you can be the bigger man, apologize, and we all move forward. Walker looked at his son, who was crying now, the tough facade completely crumbled. Then he looked at Lila, still standing straight despite her tears. I apologize, he said stiffly. Timothy. I'm sorry, Timothy whispered. I didn't mean... I was just repeating what I heard you say at dinner, about the janitor who thought he was special. Walker's face went red. We should go. After they left, Victor turned to Daniel and Lila. You did well, both of you. But Daniel, you need to understand there will always be Thomas Walkers. People who think art is a luxury only they deserve. Your job is to prove them wrong, not with words, but with music. How did you know to record? Daniel asked. I didn't. That was a bluff. But I did have someone film you entering the building and post it strategically. He grinned. Sometimes the threat of exposure is more powerful than exposure itself. They took the subway home. Lila curled against Daniel's side, exhausted from the confrontation. An elderly woman across from them was reading something on her phone, dabbing at her eyes with a tissue. She looked up, saw Daniel, and gasped. You're him, the pianist. She showed him her phone. It was the Times article. My husband was a violinist. Played with the Cleveland Orchestra until he got arthritis. He cried when he saw your video. Said it reminded him that music doesn't live in concert halls, it lives in people. More passengers looked up, recognizing him. Someone started clapping, slowly, tentatively. Others joined in until the entire subway car was applauding. Daniel felt his face burn, but Lila sat up straight, proud. That's my dad, she announced to the car. He's going to play a concert in 2 weeks. You should all come. People laughed, charmed by her confidence. Several took out their phones to look up tickets. When they reached their stop, the elderly woman pressed something into Daniel's hand. It was a worn ticket stub. From my husband's last performance, she said. 1987. He wanted to throw it away, but I kept it. I think he'd want you to have it. One musician to another across time. At home, Daniel tucked the ticket stub into the frame of Maria's photo next to the program from her last recital. These fragments of other people's dreams and losses were becoming part of his story, weaving together into something larger than individual grief. Lila was getting ready for bed when she called out, Daddy, there's something weird happening online. Daniel came to look at her tablet. The hashtag Janitor pianist was trending globally, but it had evolved into something unexpected. People were sharing stories of their own hidden talents, their own sacrificed dreams. A security guard posted a video of himself doing Shakespeare. A cashier shared her paintings. A bus driver uploaded himself singing opera. You started something, Lila said wonderingly. Look at all these people. One video caught Daniel's attention. It was a young man, maybe 25, playing violin in what looked like a storage room. The description read, I'm Margaret's son from Harrington Hall. Quit music 3 years ago after a breakdown. Seeing Daniel Cruz return to piano after 5 years and everything he'd lost, maybe it's not too late for me either. Daniel recognized the piece Bach's Partita No. 2, the Allemande. The young man's playing was rusty, but emotional, real, in a way that technical perfection could never achieve. Should we call Margaret? Lila asked. No, this is his moment to find his way back. But we can leave a comment. Daniel typed, the music was waiting for you. It always waits. Welcome back. Within minutes, the comment had thousands of likes. The next morning brought a new challenge. Daniel arrived at Natasha's to find her in heated discussion with someone on the phone in rapid Russian. She hung up and turned to him with a gleam in her eye. That was the Moscow Conservatory. They want to live stream your concert. Also, Martha Argerich's management called. She wants to attend. Daniel sat down hard. Argerich was arguably the greatest living pianist, a legend who rarely attended concerts anymore. I can't. She can't. She can, and she will. She said, and I quote, I want to see the man who made the world remember why we play. Natasha sat at the piano. So, no pressure, but you'll be performing for perhaps the greatest pianist of our time, plus a global live stream audience of potentially millions. Still want to play it safe with your program. Daniel thought about it, really thought about it. Then he said, no, you're right. I need to tell my story, not just play pieces. Good. So what will you play? I'll start with the Appassionata, but not just because Beethoven was going deaf. Because it's about struggle against fate, about refusing to be silenced. Then something by Maria Dias Mendonça. Natasha looked surprised. The Portuguese composer? She's quite obscure. She was Maria's favorite. My wife was Portuguese, did I mention that she used to sing Mendonça's songs? There's a piano transcription of her Canção de Embalar, a lullaby. Maria sang it to Lila in the womb. Beautiful. What else? The Chopin Ballade, of course. The audience will expect it, but I want to end with something original, a piece I've been working on. You said you didn't compose. I didn't, but I've been writing something these past few days. It's rough, maybe impossible, but it's true. Natasha smiled the first genuine, warm smile he had seen from her. Now you're thinking like an artist. Play it for me. Daniel moved to the piano, his hands trembling slightly. The piece began quietly, a simple melody in the right hand that could have been a lullaby. But underneath the left hand played a pattern that was slightly off-syncopated, suggesting something broken. As the piece developed, the two hands seemed to be telling different stories. One of loss, one of hope, until gradually they began to synchronize to find each other to create something new from the fragments. It was technically demanding in unexpected ways, requiring the performer to maintain two completely different emotional states simultaneously before bringing them together. It was also deeply personal, clearly autobiographical, the musical equivalent of learning to walk again after a devastating injury. When he finished, Natasha was crying. What do you call it? Invisible. Because that's what I was. What so many of us are. Not anymore, she said softly. Never again. They worked for 6 more hours, Natasha pushing him harder than he'd been pushed since his doctorate days. But it was different now. Then he'd been trying to prove he belonged. Now he was trying to prove that leaving and returning was its own form of mastery. Lila practiced on the second piano, and occasionally Natasha would have them play together. Simple duets that taught Lila about listening, about musical conversation, about the way two instruments could become one voice. She has it, Natasha told Daniel quietly while Lila was in the bathroom. The thing that can't be taught. She feels the music in her bones like her mother must have. I don't want to push her. Then don't. But don't hide it from her either. Let her choose with full knowledge of what she's choosing. That evening they moved into their new apartment. It was modest by Manhattan standards, but palatial compared to their Queens place. 2 bedrooms, actual living room, and most importantly, space for the piano that would arrive tomorrow. As they unpacked, Lila found a box Daniel had hidden in a closet for 5 years. Inside were his old programs reviews from his student concerts, photographs from his conservatory days, and at the bottom, wrapped in tissue paper, his wedding ring. He'd stopped wearing it after Maria died, the weight of it too much to bear. You should wear it for the concert, Lila said softly. Why? Because you're not hiding anymore. Not from the music, not from the memories, not from who you really are. Daniel slipped the ring back on. It felt strange after 5 years, but also right, like a piece of himself clicking back into place. His phone rang. It was James Patterson from the Times. Daniel, I'm sorry to bother you, but something's happened. The article has been picked up globally. The Guardian wants to do a piece. Der Spiegel is sending a reporter. The Japanese Times is running it front page tomorrow. He paused. But more importantly, Lincoln Center called. They want to discuss something. They wouldn't tell me what, but they said it's significant. Daniel looked at Lila, who was arranging their few possessions in the new space, trying to make it feel like home. She'd been through so much, carried so much weight for someone so young. Tell them I'll meet with them after the concert. Whatever they want can wait until then. Daniel, this could be. My daughter needs stability more than I need opportunities. We just moved. She's starting at a new school next week. The concert is enough change for now. After he hung up, Lila came over and hugged him. You know I'd be okay with whatever you needed to do, right? I know, but I've learned something these past few days. The music isn't going anywhere. It waited for me for 5 years. It can wait a little longer for things to settle. That night, in their new apartment, with boxes still stacked against the walls, Daniel played the old keyboard for the last time before they'd donate it. He played all the pieces he'd learned when Lila was a baby, the ones he'd hummed to her when she couldn't sleep, when the grief was so heavy he could barely breathe. But now the grief had transformed into something else. Not gone, never gone, but integrated into the music, making it richer, deeper, more human. The notes carried both sorrow and joy loss, and discovery endings and beginnings. Lila fell asleep on the couch, listening to him play. Daniel covered her with a blanket, then returned to the keyboard, playing softer, now working through his new composition, refining it, discovering what it wanted to be. Outside New York hummed with its endless energy, but inside in a small apartment where a father played piano while his daughter slept, Time seemed to slow to gentle, to allow for the possibility that broken things could be made whole, that silent voices could sing again, that the invisible could step into the light and be seen, truly seen at last. The morning of the concert arrived with an unseasonable warmth that made the city feel restless, expectant. Daniel woke at 4:30, not from his alarm but from a dream where Maria was sitting in the front row of Harrington Hall, her hands folded in her lap, wearing the blue dress from their last concert together. She hadn't spoken in the dream, just smiled and nodded as if to say, "It's time." Lila was already awake, sitting at their new piano in her pajamas, playing the melody he'd taught her with careful concentration. The Yamaha had been delivered 3 days ago, and she'd barely left its bench except for meals and sleep. "Couldn't sleep either?" Daniel asked, sitting beside her. "I was practicing what I'll tell people when they ask me about tonight." She continued playing while she talked. "My dad is Daniel Cruz. He chose me over music, but tonight he's choosing both. And that's the bravest thing anyone can do, admit they were wrong about having to choose at all." Daniel pulled her close, kissing the top of her head. "When did you become so wise?" "Tuesday," she said solemnly, then giggled. "Daddy, are you nervous?" "Terrified." "Good. Natasha says terror makes us present, comfort makes us lazy." The phone had been ringing since 5 reporters, well-wishers, people Daniel hadn't heard from in years, suddenly remembering they knew him. He turned it to silent, but he could see the screen lighting up constantly with notifications. They had breakfast at the diner around the corner, their new routine in the new neighborhood. The owner, an elderly Greek man named Stavros, had recognized them from the news and refused to let them pay. "My daughter was a dancer," he said, refilling Daniel's coffee for the 3rd time. "Tore her ACL at 17, never danced again, became an accountant. Good job, good life, but..." He shrugged. "The music in her died that day. Maybe after tonight's scene you return she'll find a way to dance again, even if just for herself." These stories kept finding Daniel at the grocery store, on the subway, from strangers on the street. Everyone, it seemed, had a dream they'd abandoned, a talent they'd buried, a version of themselves they'd had to leave behind. And somehow Daniel's return to the piano had given them permission to grieve those losses and maybe, possibly, reclaim them. They arrived at Harrington Hall at noon. The concert wasn't until 8, but Natasha had insisted on a full rehearsal with the hall's acoustics. The building was buzzing with activity camera crews setting up for the live stream technicians, adjusting lights, Margaret directing everything with the intensity of a general preparing for battle. "Daniel!" She rushed over, clipboard clutched to her chest. "Small change of plans. We've had to move to the main stage configuration. We're expecting..." She paused, as if not quite believing her own words. 2,000 people. We've had to open the balconies." Daniel felt his knees go weak. "The hall only holds 1,500 normally, but we've added seats, opened standing room sections. The fire marshal approved it this morning." She touched his arm. "There are people flying in from Japan, Daniel. From Brazil. Someone chartered a bus from Detroit auto workers who saw your story and wanted to witness what they're calling the reclamation." Victor appeared looking unusually subdued in a simple black suit instead of his usual flashy attire. "How are you holding up?" "Like I might throw up," Daniel answered honestly. "Good. I threw up before every major deal for my first 10 years in business. Means it matters." He handed Daniel an envelope. "This came for you this morning, hand delivered." Inside was a single sheet of paper with a brief handwritten note. "Mr. Cruz, I cannot attend tonight due to health, but I will be watching the live stream. Play as if no one is watching. Play as if everyone who ever felt invisible is sitting in that hall. We are all with you. Mo Argerich." Daniel had to sit down. Martha Argerich had written to him. Him, a janitor who hadn't touched a piano in 5 years until a week ago. "Daddy, look." Lila was on stage staring up at the lights. "They're all different colors now." "Subtle projection mapping," Margaret explained. "Nothing gaudy, just gentle color shifts that respond to the music. Victor's idea." "Since when do I do subtle?" Victor laughed. "But tonight isn't about spectacle, it's about truth. The lights will simply help the audience see what we're all hearing, the emotional landscape of the music." Natasha arrived at 12:30, dressed in an elegant burgundy gown that made her look like visiting royalty. She walked onto the stage, studied the piano's placement, then had the crew adjust it 3 inches to the left. "The acoustics in this hall are deceptive," she explained to Daniel. "3 inches changes everything. Now play your program. Not a run-through play it. The hall needs to remember your sound before tonight." Daniel sat at the Steinway, the same one from that first night. But now he wasn't in his janitor's uniform. He wore jeans and a sweater, Lila's Christmas gift. He looked like what he was: a father, a worker, a man who had lived through loss and chosen survival. But when his hands touched the keys, he transformed. The Appassionata erupted from the piano with a fury that made the lighting crew stop their work to listen. This wasn't the controlled passion of a young conservatory student, but the deep-earned emotion of someone who had fought fate and lost, then chosen to fight again anyway. The first movement was Beethoven's rage against deafness, but it was also Daniel's rage against the drunk driver who killed Maria, against the system that made him choose between art and survival, against 5 years of forced silence. The second movement brought tears to Margaret's eyes. It was a meditation on loss, but also on what remains after loss, the memories, the lessons, the love that transcends physical presence. Daniel played it for Maria, but also for every person who had ever stood at a grave and wondered how to continue living. The third movement was Resurrection Defiance, a declaration that even the defeated could rise. As the final notes crashed through the hall, the assembled crew hardened New York technicians who had seen everything burst into spontaneous applause. "Again," Natasha said simply, "but this time, remember, you're not fighting the piano, you're dancing with it." He played the program 3 times, each iteration revealing new layers, new possibilities. The Mendonça lullaby made Lila cry, recognizing something in it that lived deeper than memory. The song her mother had sung to her before she was born. His original composition, Invisible, evolved with each playing, becoming less about hiddenness and more about the moment of choosing to be seen. By 4 o'clock, exhaustion was setting in. Natasha sent Daniel and Lila to the green room to rest, but sleep was impossible. Instead, they sat together on the small couch, Lila reading Harry Potter aloud, while Daniel half listened, his mind running through the program over and over. At 6, Margaret knocked. "Daniel, there's someone here to see you." It was Richard Blackstone, the pharmaceutical executive from that first morning, but he wasn't alone. With him was a young woman in a wheelchair, her hands curved in a way that suggested cerebral palsy. "This is my daughter Jennifer," he said. "She wanted to meet you before the concert." Jennifer's speech was labored but determined. "I'm a composer," she managed. "In my head, can't play, but I hear it." Daniel knelt beside her wheelchair. "Music doesn't require hands, it requires soul, and I can see yours from here." She smiled, then gestured to her father, who pulled out a tablet. On it was musical notation software showing a complex orchestral score. "She writes with eye-tracking software," Blackstone explained. "It takes her hours to write what someone else could do in minutes. But Daniel, this is what she composed after seeing your video." Daniel studied the score. It was sophisticated, emotional, clearly the work of someone who understood music at a deep level despite physical limitations. "This is beautiful," he said to Jennifer. "The harmonic progressions in the second movement, they're innovative but still accessible. You have real talent." Tears ran down her face. "Play something for me." Daniel looked at the green room's upright piano, then at Natasha, who had been standing in the doorway. She nodded. He sat and played a simplified version of Jennifer's composition, translating the orchestral score to piano on sight. It was lovely, melancholic, but not depressing, like watching sunrise through rain. When he finished, Jennifer was sobbing with joy. "First time," she whispered. "Heard it outside. My head." After they left, Natasha said quietly, "This is why we play Daniel. Not for fame or money or even artistic immortality. We play because somewhere someone needs to hear that they're not alone in what they feel." 7 o'clock. The hall was beginning to fill. Daniel, now in his new tuxedo, stood in the wings watching people find their seats. He spotted the subway car driver from the Bronx who had shared his story about playing saxophone in high school. There was the cashier from his old grocery store in Queens, dressed in her finest clothes. A group of janitors from various buildings around the city sat together having pooled their money for tickets. But there were also the wealthy patrons, the regular donors, the critics. He saw the Times music critic, famously harsh, already taking notes. The classical music magazine reviewer who had once written that technical proficiency without emotional authenticity is merely expensive noise. "Daddy!" Lila appeared beside him in a navy dress they'd bought yesterday, looking older than her 10 years. "There's someone you need to see." She led him to the lobby, where a group of people stood uncertainly, clearly feeling out of place among the arriving elite. Daniel recognized them immediately, the night cleaning crew from Harrington Hall. Tom, who always snuck cigarettes by the loading dock. Carmen, who sang while she worked. Eddie, who had been there 15 years and knew every hiding spot in the building. "We couldn't afford tickets," Tom said sheepishly, "but we wanted to be here even if just outside." "Margaret," Daniel called. When she appeared, he said, "These are my colleagues. They need seats." "Daniel, we're sold out." "Then they can have the board's reserve seats." Victor, overhearing, laughed. "Done. Let the board members stand if they arrive late. These folks have priority." As his former coworkers filed in, overwhelmed by the gesture, Carmen grabbed Daniel's hand. "You show them, Danny. Show them we're all more than what we do to survive." 7:45. Natasha gave him final instructions, though they both knew he was as ready as he would ever be. "Remember," she said, "you're not trying to prove anything. You're simply sharing what you've carried alone for too long." Lila hugged him tight. "Mom's here," she whispered. "I can feel her." 7:55. Margaret walked onto the stage to introduce him. The hall fell silent. "Ladies and gentlemen, 2 weeks ago, something extraordinary happened in this hall. A man who had been invisible to most of us for 5 years revealed himself to be an artist of exceptional caliber. But more than that, he reminded us that every person we pass without seeing, every worker we take for granted, every human being we reduce to their function, might be carrying within them universes of talent, dreams, and stories." She paused, looking directly at the cameras, live streaming to the world. Tonight, Daniel Cruz returns to the piano, not as a curiosity or a viral sensation, but as what he has always been, a musician. Please welcome him with the respect he has always deserved, but only recently received. Daniel walked onto the stage and the applause was immediate, thunderous. But he barely heard it. His focus had narrowed to the piano waiting for him like an old friend who had never doubted his return. He sat, adjusted the bench, and placed his hands on the keys. The hall fell silent. Somewhere in the world, Martha Argerich was watching. Somewhere, Jennifer was listening with her father. Somewhere, thousands of other invisible artists were holding their breath. Daniel began to play. The Appassionata flowed from his fingers with a power that seemed to come from the earth itself. This wasn't the careful, studied performance of his rehearsals, but something rawer, more honest. Every note carried the weight of 5 years of silence, but also the explosive joy of sound returning. The first movement built like a storm. Beethoven's struggle with deafness becoming Daniel's struggle with invisibility, with choosing between art and survival, with the guilt of surviving when Maria hadn't. When he reached the development section, something shifted. The piano seemed to expand, filling not just the hall, but the hearts of everyone listening. The auto workers from Detroit found themselves crying without knowing why. The janitors nodded in recognition of something they'd felt but never been able to express. Even the critics stopped taking notes, caught in the spell of witnessing something beyond mere performance. The second movement was prayer meditation, a conversation with absence. Daniel played it for Maria, and everyone in the hall who had lost someone felt their own ghosts draw near. The melody was simple, but the harmonies beneath it suggested depths of feeling that words could never reach. In her seat, Lila closed her eyes and saw her mother clearly, not from photographs, but from somewhere deeper, genetic memory, perhaps, or the lingering echo of all those songs sung in the womb. The third movement erupted with defiant joy. If the first movement was struggle and the second was grief, the third was the decision to continue living, creating, being, despite all reasons to stop. Daniel's hands flew across the keys and passages that should have been impossible for someone who hadn't practiced in 5 years, but the music had been living in his muscles all along, waiting. When the last chord rang out, the silence lasted a full 10 seconds. Then the audience exploded. People leaped to their feet, applauding with an intensity that shook the chandeliers. But Daniel remained seated, breathing hard, not quite ready to return to the world beyond the piano. He waited for the applause to die down, then spoke into the microphone Margaret had placed by the piano. The piece I just played was written by a man going deaf, refusing to be silenced. This next piece was written by a woman most of you have never heard of, Maria Diaz Mendonça. She died in obscurity in 1962, her music mostly forgotten. But my wife, also named Maria, loved her songs. She sang them to our daughter before she was born. He began the lullaby, and its simplicity after the Beethoven was like stepping from a storm into sudden calm. The melody was beautiful, but tinged with sadness, a mother's song to a child she might not see grow up. Daniel played it with absolute tenderness, each note a droplet of love preserved in sound. In the audience, more people wept. Parents thought of their children, children of their parents. Every one of the lullabies that connected generations, the songs that survived when singers didn't. My wife died 10 years ago, Daniel continued when the piece ended. For 5 years after that, I didn't touch a piano. I thought music was a luxury I couldn't afford while raising my daughter alone. But I learned something these past 2 weeks. Music isn't a luxury. It's a necessity. Not for the audience, but for the artist. Denying it doesn't make us noble. It makes us incomplete. He turned back to the piano for the Chopin ballade, the piece that had started everything. But this time he played it differently. 2 weeks ago it had been about proving himself. Tonight it was about storytelling. The opening melody wasn't a question, but an invitation. Come listen. Let me tell you about loss and redemption, about the moment when giving up becomes starting over. The waltz section danced with bittersweetness, remembering better times while acknowledging they were gone. The development section built with increasing complexity, life piling obligation upon obligation until the melody almost disappeared beneath the weight. But it persevered, fighting through the passages, refusing to be buried. The coda approached like destiny, inevitable and terrible. But Daniel played it not as an ending, but as a transformation. The final passages weren't destruction, but break through the melody, finally free of the harmonies that had constrained it, soaring into silence. This time when the applause came, Daniel stood and bowed. But he raised his hand for quiet before it could fully build. I have one more piece to play, something I wrote this week. It's called Invisible. And it's for everyone who has ever felt unseen, unheard, unvalued. For every artist who chose survival over art and carries that grief like a stone. For every dreamer who watches others live their abandoned dreams. You are not invisible. You never were. The world was just looking in the wrong direction. The piece began so quietly that people leaned forward to hear it, a single note repeated like a heartbeat or a footstep or someone knocking gently on a door. Then a melody emerged, tentative, almost apologetic. This was the invisible person's theme, present, but unnoticed, beautiful, but unheard. The left hand entered with a contrasting pattern, the visible world rushing past, busy with its important concerns. The two parts seemed unaware of each other, at first occupying the same space, but not the same reality. Gradually, moments of intersection occurred. The melody grew stronger, more insistent. The accompaniment began to notice, to make space to listen. This was the moment of recognition, of being seen, but also the terror that came with visibility after so long in shadows. The development section was conversation, the two parts, learning each other's language, finding harmony where there had been disconnection. It built to a moment of complete synthesis, the melody and accompaniment becoming one voice but then deliberately separated again. Because the point wasn't to lose identity and recognition, but to maintain self while being seen. The final section brought both themes back but transformed. The invisible melody was now confident, even proud. The accompaniment, which had represented the oblivious world, now supported and celebrated the melody it had once ignored. They ended together in unison on a major chord that rang with hope. Daniel lifted his hands from the keys for the last time that night. The silence that followed was different from any before. It was the silence of recognition, of understanding, of 2,000 people simultaneously seeing themselves in the music. Then the dam broke. The applause was seismic, people crying and cheering simultaneously. The standing ovation lasted 15 minutes. Daniel bowed, left. The stage was called back, bowed again. This repeated 6 times before Victor finally walked out and raised his hands for quiet. Ladies and gentlemen, Daniel Cruz. More applause. In the live stream chat, comments poured in from around the world. Watching from Tokyo, crying at 10 a.m. Detroit here, our whole factory floor is watching. I'm a janitor in Mumbai. Thank you for seeing us. Finally, emotionally and physically exhausted, Daniel was allowed to leave the stage. Lila met him in the wings, launching herself into his arms. You did it, Daddy. You came back. We came back, he corrected, holding her tight. The green room filled with people, critics wanting quotes, audience members sharing their own stories, managers offering representation. But Daniel only had eyes for one person. Natasha standing quietly in the corner, smiling with satisfaction. Well, he asked, you were adequate, she said, then laughed at his expression. Daniel, you were transcendent. You played like someone who had lived lost and chosen to live again. That's the rarest kind of artist, the one who knows what music is for. James Patterson from The Times appeared, his recorder ready. Daniel, how does it feel to have played what many are already calling one of the most important concerts of the decade? Daniel thought about it. Like I finally exhaled after holding my breath for 5 years. What's next? Tomorrow I start my job as artist in residence here. Lila has school. Life continues, but now with music in it. But surely you'll want to capitalize on this moment, recording contracts, international tours. Mr. Patterson, Daniel interrupted gently. I spent 5 years thinking I had to choose between music and life. I'm not making that mistake again. Yes, I'll perform. Yes, I'll record if the right opportunity comes. But I'm also going to be at my daughter's school, plays, help her with homework, make her breakfast. The music will fit around life, not the other way around. Margaret appeared with a tablet. Daniel, you need to see this. The screen showed the live stream statistics. Over 3 million people had watched live. The number was climbing as replays began. But more importantly, #invisible. No More was trending globally, with people sharing stories of returning to abandoned dreams. A message popped up from Martha Argerich. Bravissimo. When you're ready, I would like to play Brahms' 2 piano works with you, but only when your daughter says it's okay. Lila read it over his shoulder. Tell her yes, but she has to come to New York. We're not leaving again. The crowd in the green room gradually dispersed, but one person remained, Thomas Walker. Not the father, but Timothy, the boy Lila had punched. He stood in the doorway with his mother looking terrified. Mr. Cruz, the mother said, Timothy has something to say. The boy stepped forward. I'm sorry, really sorry. Not just because my dad made me, but because... He paused, gathering courage. Because I play too. Violin. But I hide it because Dad says it's not masculine. Watching you tonight, seeing how brave you were to show everyone who you really are, I want to be brave too. Daniel knelt to the boy's level. Music doesn't care about masculine or feminine. It only cares about truth. Play your truth, Timothy. The boy's mother had tears in her eyes. We're separating, she said quietly. Thomas and I. Tonight was the final straw, seeing how his attitude has poisoned our son. Timothy's going to live with me, and he's going to play violin as much as he wants. After they left, the hall began to empty. The camera crews packed up the lights, dimmed, the crowds dispersed into the New York night. Soon it was just Daniel, Lila, Margaret, Victor, and Natasha in the empty hall. I should clean up, Daniel said automatically, then caught himself. Old habits. The cleaning crew will handle it, Margaret said. The actual cleaning crew, not you. They walked to the stage one last time. The Steinway sat alone in a single spotlight, looking like it was waiting for something. Play one more, Lila requested, just for us. Daniel sat at the bench, Lila beside him. He began to play not classical this time, but a simple improvisation, a melody that seemed to capture everything that had happened, everything that had been lost and found and transformed. One by one, the others sat in the front row listening. The music floated through the empty hall, intimate now without the crowd, a private celebration among friends who had witnessed resurrection. When he finished, they sat in comfortable silence. Then Victor spoke. Daniel, I've been thinking. The fund that was raised, it's over 3 million now. What if we use it to create a program? Not just music education, but specifically for adults who abandon their artistic dreams. Evening classes, weekend workshops, all free, all taught by professional artists who understand the struggle. The Invisible Artist Program, Margaret suggested. The Maria Cruz Center for Rediscovered Music, Natasha countered. Just second chances, Lila said. Simple. True. They all looked at Daniel. Second chances, he agreed. Because that's what this is about. Not first chances, those are for the young, the privileged, the lucky. Second chances are for the rest of us, the ones who had to choose survival, but never stopped hearing music in our heads. They left the hall together, stepping into the warm September night. The city hummed around them, the same New York that had witnessed Daniel's 5 years of invisibility, but somehow different now. Or maybe it was just that Daniel was different, no longer hiding, no longer silent. As they waited for their taxi, a young man approached, early 20s, nervous, carrying a violin case. Mr. Cruz, I'm sorry to bother you, but I'm Margaret's son. I wanted to thank you. I played tonight after your concert, first time in 3 years. My old quartet was in the audience, and we're going to start rehearsing again. Margaret gasped, then hugged her son fiercely. You didn't tell me you were here. I couldn't, not until I knew I could do it. But watching Mr. Cruz, I realized the music doesn't leave us. We leave it, and we can always go back. The taxi arrived. As they drove through the city, Lila fell asleep against Daniel's shoulder, exhausted from the emotional intensity of the evening. Daniel watched the lights blur past, thinking about circles, about endings that were beginnings, about the moment when surrender becomes victory. His phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. It was a photo, a janitor's closet, in what looked like an office building, but with a small keyboard set up inside sheet music taped to the walls. The message read, I'm the night janitor at a law firm. Been hiding my music for 7 years. After tonight, I'm done hiding. Thank you for showing us the way back. Daniel smiled, saving the photo. This was what mattered, not the fame or the viral videos or even the concert itself, but the permission it gave others to reclaim their abandoned selves. They arrived home to find their apartment building's entrance decorated with flowers and a banner, Welcome Home, Maestro Cruz. Their neighbors had watched the live stream and wanted to celebrate. Mrs. Chen was there with homemade dumplings. The couple from 3B had brought wine. Even the super, usually gruff and impatient, shook Daniel's hand with genuine warmth. My wife was a painter, he said quietly. Gave it up when we had kids. After seeing you tonight, she's setting up a studio in our spare room. You did that. Later, after the impromptu party had ended and Lila was asleep, Daniel sat at their piano. Not to practice or perform, but simply to play for himself in his own home without apology or explanation. He thought about Maria, about the life they'd planned, the concerts they'd never give together. But for the first time, the grief didn't overwhelm him. It was there would always be there, but it had become part of the music rather than its enemy. His hands found a melody. Something new, something that hadn't existed until this moment. It was a song of gratitude, not for the loss, but for what the loss had taught him. That love persists beyond presence. That dreams deferred aren't always dreams denied. That sometimes we have to lose ourselves completely to discover who we really are. As he played, he could almost hear Maria's voice joining in, not from memory but from imagination, creating new harmonies they'd never had the chance to explore in life. This was the gift music offered, the ability to continue conversations with the dead, to build bridges between what was and what might have been. The last note faded into silence. Daniel closed the piano and went to stand by the window, looking out at the city that never slept. Somewhere out there, other invisible artists were making their own decisions about whether to stay hidden or step into the light. He hoped they chose light, but he understood if they didn't. Everyone's moment came at its own time. His phone showed 847 messages, 2,000 emails, and countless social media notifications. Tomorrow he would begin sorting through them, finding ways to help where he could. Declining what would take him too far from Lila, building a life that included both music and fatherhood. But tonight he simply stood at the window watching the city pulse with its endless energy, feeling for the first time in 5 years that he was part of it rather than apart from it. He was no longer the invisible janitor or the viral sensation or even the comeback pianist. He was Daniel Cruz, father, musician, survivor, visible at last, and finally fully, completely alive.